Tonight, you're going to cross the most dangerous passages on Earth. 12 times 12 stories, in 12 different people, across 12 different eras. And not all of you will make it home. You're standing on an island that doesn't appear on most maps. It's June 1923. The Arctic sun hangs low over a landscape of frozen tundra, and silence so thick it presses against your eardrums like cotton. You haven't spoken to another human being in months, because there are no other human beings. Not anymore. The last one died 3 weeks ago. His name was Lorne Knight, and you nursed him through his final days, even though he'd been cruel to you, even though he'd mocked you, even though on his worst days he made you feel like you were less than the frozen dirt beneath his sleeping bag. You read to him, you cleaned his bed sores, and when he stopped breathing, you sat with his body for a long time before you understood what you had to do next. You couldn't move him. He was too heavy. So you did the only thing you could think of. You stacked wooden boxes around his body one by one until he was walled off from the foxes and the wind and whatever else might come in the night. Then you walked to the supply tent, sat down next to a cat named Vic, and tried to remember how to breathe. Your name is Ada Blackjack. You are 25 years old. You are Inupiat, from Nome, Alaska. 800 miles of frozen Arctic Ocean separates you from your son, Bennett, who is 5 years old and lying in a hospital bed with tuberculosis. You joined this expedition for $50 a month. You had never hunted an animal in your life. You had never fired a rifle. You were a seamstress. And now you are the only person alive on Wrangel Island. But how did a seamstress from Nome end up alone on an island north of Siberia? If these stories speak to you, if you find comfort in the lessons found in the quiet corners of history, tap the follow button to join our circle of dreamers, and let the next story find you when you need it most. Welcome, Nightlings. This is Huxley. If you like listening or falling asleep to real stories that carry you through history into the minds of those who shaped the world before us, then this is the place for you. Where are you listening from? And how long do you play an episode before falling asleep? 5 minutes? 20 minutes? More than an hour? Let me know in the comments. Tonight, I transport you into a dark and unknown world. Into 12 true stories of brave people crossing the most dangerous frozen terrain on Earth. The Arctic and the Antarctic. But first, let's settle in together. I invite you to try something with me. It's called cyclic sighing. Researchers at Stanford found it's actually more effective at calming the nervous system than mindfulness meditation. Here's how it works. Breathe in slowly through your nose, filling your lungs, and then take one more tiny sip of air at the top, even when you think they're full. Hold it, just for a moment. And now, let it all go. A long, slow exhale through your mouth. Longer than the inhale. Let your shoulders drop. Let the bed hold your weight. One more time. In through the nose. that little extra sip at the top. Hold. And let it all pour out. Slowly. There's no hurry. There's never any hurry here. Now, I invite you to pause and continue yourself for a full 5 minutes if you like. Let's begin. Your name is Ada Blackjack, and you need $50 a month. That's it. Well, that's not quite all of it, but that's the reason you're here. Not adventure, not discovery, not the burning need to plant a flag or write your name in the history of exploration. You need money, because your son Bennett is 5 years old, and he has tuberculosis. And right now, he's lying in an orphanage in Nome, Alaska, because you can't afford to care for him. And that fact, that single unbearable fact, is the engine that drives everything that happens next. It's the summer of 1921. You're 23 years old, Inupiat. Born in Spruce Creek, Alaska, raised in the rough-edged mining town of Nome. Your life has not been easy. Your first husband left you, your family couldn't help, and the only skill you have that anyone will pay for is sewing. You're a seamstress, a good one. But good seamstresses in Nome don't make $50 a month. So when a man named Vilhjalmur Stefansson puts out a call for volunteers to join an Arctic expedition and offers $50 a month for a seamstress to sew and repair clothing on a remote island, you listen. Now, Vilhjalmur Stefansson. Remember that name. He's a Canadian-born explorer with a talent for grand ideas and a remarkable gift for not being present when those ideas go wrong. Stefansson has a plan to colonize Wrangel Island, a frozen, uninhabited chunk of rock in the Chukchi Sea about 90 miles north of the Siberian coast. He wants to claim it for Canada, or maybe Britain, or maybe just for the glory of Vilhjalmur Stefansson. The details are a little fuzzy. His plan is simple. Send a small party to the island. They'll live off the land, hunt polar bears, trap foxes, fish through the ice. A supply ship will come within a year. Easy, straightforward. Nothing could possibly go wrong. Stefansson recruits 4 young men. Alan Crawford, 20 years old, the leader. An idealistic Canadian with almost no Arctic experience. Milton Gallo, 19. Lorne Knight, 28. The oldest and the one with the most northern experience. Fred Mora, 28. A veteran of Stefansson's previous expeditions who should have known better. And you, the seamstress. Stefansson himself, of course, does not go to Wrangel Island. He stays in New York. He'll manage things from there. By cable. From his apartment. Because, of course he will. On September 16th, 1921, the 5 of you land on Wrangel Island. The supply ship drops you off with provisions for 6 months, some trapping equipment, a few rifles, ammunition, and assurances that another ship will arrive the following summer. At first, things aren't terrible. The hunting is decent. The men shoot seals and trap foxes. You do your job, sewing and repairing parkas, boots, sleeping bags. You're cold, yes, and lonely. And the island is about as hospitable as the surface of the moon. But you have food and shelter, and the promise that help is coming. Summer 1922 arrives. You watch the horizon. Every day, you scan the ice for the silhouette of a ship, Weeks pass. Then months. The supply ship Teddy Bear was dispatched from Nome in August, but impenetrable pack ice turned it back. It never reached you. No ship comes. Now the second winter is closing in, and your supplies are running low. The hunting has become difficult. Game is scarce. Ammunition is limited. Crawford, the young leader, does his best, but he's learning on the job. And the job is keeping 5 people alive in one of the most hostile places on Earth. By January 1923, the situation is critical. Food is running out. Knight is sick. He's developed what appears to be scurvy, though no one is entirely sure. The men argue about what to do. Someone needs to go for help. On January 28th, 1923, 3 of the men, Crawford, Galley, and Mora, set out across the frozen Chukchi Sea toward Siberia. 90 miles across drifting pack ice. In the dead of Arctic winter, they are never seen again. You don't know this yet. In your mind, they're still walking, still alive, still moving toward help that will come back for you. But weeks pass, then months, and the help doesn't come. And the 3 men don't return. And slowly, quietly, in the way that the worst truths always reveal themselves, you begin to understand. It's just you and Knight now. And Knight is dying. He can barely move. Scurvy has weakened him to the point where standing is an achievement and walking is impossible. He lies in the shelter, growing weaker by the day. And here's the thing about Knight that makes your story so much more complicated than a simple survival tale. He was not kind to you. Knight was, by most accounts, dismissive of Ada, sometimes cruel. He treated her with the casual contempt that men of that era often reserved for indigenous women, as if she were less than a full participant in the expedition, more a servant than a companion. He complained about her cooking. He criticized her work. He made it clear in 100 small ways that he considered her beneath him. And when he got sick, you nursed him anyway. You read to him. You changed his clothes when he couldn't do it himself. You cleaned his bed sores. You brought him food and water, and sat with him through the long Arctic nights, talking to him even when he couldn't talk back. Not because he deserved it, not because you'd forgotten how he treated you, but because that's what you do. When someone is dying and you're the only person left, you take care of them. That's the deal. On June 23rd, 1923, Lorne Knight dies. You sit with his body for a while. Then you do the most practical, clear-eyed thing anyone has ever done in the history of Arctic exploration. You assess the situation. You are alone on an uninhabited island 90 miles north of Siberia. You have limited food, a rifle you've barely used, and the expedition's cat, a black and white animal named Vic. You could lie down, you could give up. No one would blame you. No one would even know. But Bennett is still in that orphanage. Bennett is still waiting for you. And you made a promise, not in words, but in the act of leaving, that you would come back, that the money you're earning here would bring him home. So you do something extraordinary, something that honestly should be in every survival manual and every history textbook and isn't in either. You teach yourself everything. You have never hunted. You learn to hunt. You've never trapped. You learn to trap foxes for their fur. You've never built anything more complicated than a pattern on a sewing machine. You build a platform to store meat away from foxes. You construct a boat, a small, crude thing, but functional, in case you need to travel along the coast. You learn to read the weather, to predict storms, to move camp when the wind shifts. The rifle becomes your lifeline. You practice until your aim is reliable. You shoot seals and birds. You skin them. You dry the meat. You render the fat for cooking fuel. Every skill that the 4 men on this expedition had been trained for, or at least had experience with, you figure out from scratch, through trial and error, through failure and repetition, through the sheer grinding refusal to die on an island that nobody cares about. And through all of it, Vic is there. The cat, your constant companion, sleeping in your tent, following you on short hunts, curling up against you in the darkness. It sounds almost absurd. A woman and a cat surviving alone in the Arctic. But companionship is companionship, and sometimes the difference between sanity and madness is something as small as another heartbeat in the silence. The months pass. Summer returns briefly. The ice loosens. You keep hunting, keep building, keep surviving. You sew yourself a new parka from reindeer skin, because that's what you know how to do. And it turns out that a seamstress's skills translate remarkably well to Arctic survival. Every stitch is precise. Every seam is watertight. You are, quite literally, sewing yourself alive. On August 19th, 1923, almost 2 years after you first set foot on this island, you hear something. A sound that doesn't belong to the wind or the foxes or the endless creak of shifting ice. An engine. You walk out of your shelter. You're wearing the reindeer parka you sewed yourself. Your hair is pulled back. Your face is weathered but calm. And there, anchored offshore, is a ship. The rescue vessel Donaldson. The crew that comes ashore expects to find bodies, or nothing at all. They do not expect to find a healthy, self-sufficient Inupiat woman striding out to meet them in a handmade reindeer coat with a cat on her heels. Harold Noyce, the relief party leader, would later write that Ada had mastered the Arctic so completely that she could have survived at least another year. The rescuers are, frankly, astonished. They'd come prepared for tragedy. They found competence, and now the world will fail her. Because that's what the world does. The newspapers call her the female Robinson Crusoe. Stefansson, who organized the expedition, promised it would be safe and never went, tries to exploit her story for publicity. Harold Noyce writes an account of the rescue that centers himself. Ada receives almost nothing. Her expedition salary, a few $100s for the trapped furs. That's it. She uses the money to retrieve Bennett from the orphanage. She takes him to Seattle for tuberculosis treatment. She marries twice more, lives quietly, and dies in 1983 at the age of 85. Her gravestone in Anchorage reads simply, Heroine, Wrangel Island Expedition. The world forgot Ada Blackjack, but the island didn't. The island remembers everything. You place an ad in the London papers. Or so the legend goes. The actual ad has never been verified, but the sentiment is accurate. It reads something like this. Men wanted for hazardous journey. Low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness. Safe return, doubtful. Honor and recognition in event of success. 5,000 people apply. Now, historians debate whether that ad actually ran. The original has never been found. But here's what is certain. Your name is Ernest Shackleton. It's 1914. You're Irish-born, British-raised, and you have the kind of restless ambition that makes comfortable people nervous. You've been to Antarctica twice already. The first time, Robert Falcon Scott sent you home early because you got sick, a humiliation that burned through you like a slow fuse for years. The second time, you marched farther south than any human in history, came within 97 miles of the South Pole, and turned around. Because your men were starving. Because continuing meant dying. Because, as you told your wife, Emily, I thought you'd rather have a live donkey than a dead lion. But now, someone else has reached the pole. Amundsen, the Norwegian, planted his flag there in 1911. Scott died trying. The South Pole is no longer a prize. So you've set your sights on the last great Antarctic challenge, crossing the entire continent on foot, 1,800 miles, from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, straight through the pole. No one has ever done it. No one has even come close. You name your ship Endurance, after your family motto, by endurance we conquer. It's a good name. You're going to need it. Your expedition sails south in December 1914. The world is at war. Europe is tearing itself apart. But you're heading the other direction toward a different kind of battle entirely. You have 28 men, 69 dogs, and one very grumpy ship's cat named Mrs. Chippy. You enter the Weddell Sea in January 1915, pushing through loose pack ice, searching for a landing spot on the Antarctic coast. And then the ice closes in. Not quickly, not dramatically, just gradually, the way a fist closes. One day, you're navigating between floes. The next day, the floes are touching. The day after that, they're pressing against the hull. And then there is no open water at all. Anywhere, in any direction. The Endurance is frozen solid. You try not to panic. You tell your men this is temporary. The ice will loosen in the spring. But spring is months away. And so you settle in. You establish routines. You play football on the ice. Actual football on a frozen ocean in Antarctica while your ship slowly dies. You hold dog sled races. You organize sing-alongs. You tell jokes. Because here's the thing about leadership that nobody teaches in books. When everything is falling apart, the single most important thing you can do is make people believe it isn't. The months grind on. February, March, April. The sun disappears below the horizon and the darkness comes. 24 hours of it pressing down on you like a physical weight. You can hear the ice at night. It groans, it shrieks, it sounds like something alive, something in pain. The pressure ridges build around the ship, squeezing, always squeezing. In September, the ship starts to break. You hear timbers snapping, the deck buckles, water pours in. Your carpenter works around the clock, but it's like trying to patch a dam with tissue paper. The ice is winning. The ice was always going to win. On October 27th, 1915, you give the order no captain ever wants to give. Abandon ship. You stand on the ice and watch the Endurance die. The masts splinter. The hull caves inward. The ship that was supposed to carry you across a continent disappears beneath the surface of the Weddell Sea. And with it goes your plan, your timeline, your entire reason for being here. But not your men. Your men are standing beside you on the ice, and they are alive. And as long as that is true, you have a job to do. Now begins the strangest chapter of your life. You and 28 men are camped on a drifting ice floe in the middle of the Southern Ocean. You have 3 small lifeboats salvaged from the ship, limited food, and absolutely no way to communicate with anyone. No radio, no signal flares that anyone would see. The nearest human settlement is hundreds of miles away across open ocean. You drift. For 5 months you drift. The floe carries you north, slowly, painfully, toward the edge of the pack ice. You hunt seals and penguins for food. You melt ice for water. You sleep in tents on frozen ocean, and every morning you wake up wondering if the floe beneath you has cracked in the night. It does crack, several times. Once, the ice splits directly beneath a tent where men are sleeping. One man falls into the gap between the floes, sleeping bag and all, and is hauled out just before the ice slams shut again like a jaw. By April 1916, the ice is breaking up. You can see open water. This should be good news, but it isn't. Because open water in the Southern Ocean means waves, enormous waves. You load your 28 men into 3 small boats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills, and you set out across the most dangerous sea on Earth. For 7 days, you sail through freezing spray and howling winds. Your men are frostbitten, seasick, dehydrated. The boats are open. There's no shelter from the waves that crash over the gunwales every few minutes. You navigate by dead reckoning and brief glimpses of the sun through storm clouds. One wrong calculation and you'll miss your target entirely, sailing past it into the empty Southern Ocean until the water and the cold take you. On April 15th, you see land. Elephant Island. A miserable spit of rock and ice at the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. But it's solid ground, and when your men step onto it, they are standing on something that isn't moving for the first time in 497 days. 497 days. But Elephant Island is not rescue. No ship comes here. No one knows you're alive. And so you make a decision that is either brilliant or insane. And the line between those two things, in your experience, has always been remarkably thin. You're going to take 5 men and sail the James Caird, a 22-foot lifeboat, 800 miles across the open Southern Ocean to South Georgia, where there's a whaling station. 800 miles, in a boat the size of a large car, through the Drake Passage, the most treacherous stretch of ocean on the planet, where waves routinely reach 60 feet and the wind never stops. You reinforce the James Caird with salvaged wood. You load it with a month's supply of food, a stove, sleeping bags, and a compass. Your navigator is Henry Worsley, and his job is to get you to South Georgia, using nothing but a sextant, a chronometer, and the occasional star sight through breaks in the cloud cover. If he's off by even 2 degrees, you'll sail past South Georgia and into the void. For 16 days you sail. 16 days of constant bailing. 16 days of waves so enormous they block out the sky. Your sleeping bags are soaked. Your food is salt water contaminated. Ice forms on the rigging so quickly that you have to chip it off before it capsizes the boat. At one point, you see what you think is a break in the clouds, a patch of clear sky. You point it out to Worsley. He looks up and says nothing for a long moment. It isn't a cloud break. It's the crest of a wave. The largest wave you've ever seen, or ever will see. It crashes over the James Caird, and you nearly go under. But you don't. You bail. You keep sailing. And on May 10th, 1916, you see the coast of South Georgia. You've made it, except you haven't, because you've landed on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station is on the other side. And between you and it lies an unmapped mountain range that has never been crossed. No one has ever traversed the interior of South Georgia. You have to do it now, in the dark, on foot, without proper equipment. You take Worsley and Tom Crean, two of the toughest men alive, and you start walking. For 36 hours straight, you cross glaciers, climb peaks, navigate by the stars. At one point, you reach a cliff that drops away into darkness. You can't go back. You don't have the strength. So you coil a rope beneath you, sit on it like a toboggan, and slide down the mountainside into the void. You arrive at the Stromness whaling station on the May the 20th, 1916. You are filthy. Your clothes are in tatters. Your hair is matted. Your faces are weathered beyond recognition. The station manager looks at you and asks a question that will echo through history. Who the hell are you? You tell him, and then you organize the rescue of the 22 men still waiting on Elephant Island. It takes 4 attempts. The pack ice keeps turning back the rescue ships. But on August 30th, 1916, you arrive at Elephant Island on the Chilean tug Yelcho, and you count them. Every man, every single one. 22 men, stranded on a rock at the bottom of the world for 4.5 months, and every one of them is alive. You brought everyone home. Every person who trusted you with their life, you returned them to theirs. Now, this next part is important. I want you to hold on to that feeling for a moment. The warmth of it. Because the next crossing you're about to experience, it won't end that way. In the next one, the ice doesn't just take your ship. It takes the people beside you, one by one, until you're the only one left. And the decision you'll face in a crevasse, 300 miles from anywhere, will make Shackleton's open boat voyage look almost reasonable. You turn down Robert Falcon Scott. Let that sink in for a moment. In 1910, the most famous polar explorer in Britain asked you to join his expedition to the South Pole. You said no, not because you weren't interested. You're a geologist, and Antarctica is a geologist's paradise, but because you wanted to lead your own expedition, on your own terms, to your own corner of the ice. Now, in hindsight, this was either the best or worst decision of your life. Scott and his polar party would all die on the return from the pole in 1912. So, in one sense, you dodged a bullet. But what you're about to walk into, well, dodged might be too strong a word. Your name is Douglas Mawson. You're Australian, born in Yorkshire, and you have the build of someone who was designed by committee to withstand terrible conditions. Lean, strong, stubborn in the way that rocks are stubborn. You're 30 years old. You've just established your base camp at Cape Denison on the coast of Antarctica's Commonwealth Bay. Commonwealth Bay is, quite literally, the windiest place on Earth. Not metaphorically. Not one of the windiest. The windiest. Average wind speed 50 miles per hour. That's a sustained gale. Every day. All day. The kind of wind that doesn't just blow you over. It erodes you. Your tense, your morale, your sense of what's normal. Within weeks you stop noticing the constant howl. It becomes background noise, which is, if you think about it, its own kind of madness. In November 1912, you set out on a mapping expedition with 2 companions, Lieutenant Belgrave Ninnis, a young British Army officer who handles the dogs with the easy confidence of someone born to it, and Xavier Mertz, a Swiss skiing champion with the kind of effortless physical grace that makes everyone around him feel clumsy by comparison. 3 men, 3 dog sledges, and a plan to map 300 miles of uncharted Antarctic coastline. The journey starts well. The dogs are strong. The weather cooperates mostly. You make good time across the ice shelf, charting new territory, collecting geological samples, doing the work you came here to do. Mertz skis ahead, scouting the route, his movements fluid even in the heavy Antarctic clothing. Ninnis follows behind with the main supply sled, whistling to his dogs. December 14th, 1912. You'll remember this date for the rest of your life. You're crossing a glacier. The surface looks solid, hard-packed snow, blue-white in the low Antarctic sun. Mertz is ahead on skis. You're in the middle. Ninnis is behind you with the heaviest sled, carrying the tent, most of the food, and the best dogs. Mertz's sled passes over a patch of snow. Your sled passes over the same patch. You glance back to check on Ninnis. He's gone. Not in the distance, not lagging behind. Gone. The snow where he was standing 1 second ago is now an open hole. A crevasse, hidden beneath a thin snow bridge that held for 2 sleds but collapsed under the 3rd. You scramble to the edge and look down. The crevasse drops away into blue darkness. 165 feet down, on a narrow ledge, you can see the dim shapes of a dead dog and an injured one, whimpering. The sled is there too, smashed. But Ninnis is nowhere. Below the ledge, there is only blackness. You call his name. You call and call and call. The sound echoes off the ice walls and comes back to you unchanged. There is no response. There will never be a response. In the space of 3 seconds, you've lost your tent, most of your food, your 6 best dogs, and 1 of your 2 companions. You are 300 miles from base camp, and you have, by your careful calculation, approximately 10 days' worth of food for a journey that will take at least 30. You and Mertz stand at the edge of the crevasse for 5 hours. You call down, you lower a rope, you wait. Nothing. Eventually, you do the only thing left to do. You read the burial service from memory, mark the spot with a small cairn, and turn toward home. 300 miles, 10 days of food, no tent. You fashion a makeshift tent from a spare tent cover and ski poles. It's thin, barely windproof, and small enough that you and Mertz have to press against each other to fit inside. But it's shelter, and shelter is life. The first days are manageable. You ration the remaining food carefully. You shoot the weaker dogs when they can no longer pull and add their meat to the supply. This is pragmatic. This is survival. This is also for Mertz the beginning of the end. Because Mertz is a near-vegetarian who has been caring for these dogs for months. He's named them. He talks to them. And now you're asking him to eat them. He eats them. He has no choice, but something in him begins to break. And then, the livers. Here's what you don't know. What no one knows in 1912 about husky dog livers. They contain astronomical levels of vitamin A, concentrations so extreme that consuming even small amounts can cause a condition called hypervitaminosis A. It's a form of poisoning, and the symptoms are horrifying. Your skin begins to peel, not in patches, in sheets. You pull off your socks, and the skin of your feet comes with them, stuck to the wool like wet paper. Mertz's skin is doing the same thing. Your hair starts falling out in clumps. Your fingernails loosen. Your vision blurs. Your stomach cramps. Dizziness, irritability, a bone-deep exhaustion that makes every step feel like walking through wet concrete. Mertz declines faster than you. He was slighter to begin with, and the psychological devastation of eating the dogs seems to have broken something inside him. He develops diarrhea so severe he can barely stand. He refuses to move some mornings. He becomes confused, then angry, then delirious. He screams. He thrashes. He loses control of his body in ways that are too terrible to describe and too important to ignore. On January 7th, 1913, Mertz slips into a coma. You lie next to him in the tent, listening to his breathing change. It becomes ragged, irregular. Then, just before midnight on January 8th, it stops. You are alone, 300 miles from base camp. Give or take. Your food is almost gone. Your body is falling apart. The soles of your feet have literally separated from the flesh beneath them. You discover this when you take off your socks and the skin stays behind, stuck to the wool, leaving raw, weeping tissue exposed to the cold. Every morning you bandage your feet back together with strips of cloth, tape them into your boots, and try not to look at them again until nightfall. You cut your sled in half with a penknife to lighten the load. You build a small sail from a jacket to catch the wind. You're not traveling anymore. You're crawling. 10 miles a day becomes 5. 5 becomes 3. And then you fall into a crevasse. The snow gives way beneath you without warning. 1 second you're walking. The next, you're hanging in blue space, 14 feet down. The rope attached to your sled, the only thing keeping you from falling into an abyss that has no visible bottom. Your sled has caught on the lip of the crevasse above you, wedged across the opening like a bridge. You hang there, spinning slowly, looking down into the void, and you think about it. You genuinely think about it. Cutting the rope, letting go. It would be so easy, just release your grip and let the ice have you. Your feet are destroyed. Your body is poisoning itself. Your companion is dead. No one knows where you are. No one is coming. The rope is right there. 1 cut. 1 decision. And it's over. But you don't cut it. And here's the thing that Mawson himself could never fully explain. He didn't know why he didn't cut it. Later, in his journals, he wrote about that moment with an almost clinical detachment. He described the physical act of climbing back up the rope, hand over hand, his disintegrating fingers gripping the frozen cord, his ruined feet scrabbling against the ice wall for purchase. He described reaching the lip of the crevasse, hauling himself over the edge and lying on the snow, gasping, unable to move. And then the snow gave way again, and he fell back in. Same crevasse, same rope, same 14-foot drop into nothing. He climbed out a second time, and this time he crawled away from the edge before collapsing. The last miles are a blur. You're not walking, you're stumbling, falling, getting up, falling again. Your body has crossed a threshold beyond exhaustion into something that doesn't have a name, a state where movement becomes automatic, divorced from thought or feeling. You're a machine running on fumes, and the fumes are running out. On February 8th, 1913, you stagger into base camp, and you see the relief ship Aurora. Leaving, the ship is pulling away from the shore, its smokestack trailing a thin line of grey against the white sky. It's leaving because you're 2 weeks overdue and they've given you up for dead. They are, at this moment, heading north toward Australia, and if they make it to open water, they won't be back for another year. But someone sees you. A small party that volunteered to stay behind, 6 men who refused to leave without confirmation that you were dead. They see a figure stumbling toward camp, barely recognizable as human, and they come running. You collapse into their arms. You weigh less than you did when you set out. Your skin is peeling, your hair is gone. Your feet are bandaged bundles of cloth and pain. But you're alive. You're alive. And you'll spend the next year stranded at Cape Denison, waiting for the Aurora to return, because the ship is already gone and won't be back until the next Antarctic summer. A full year trapped in the windiest place on Earth, with 6 men who gave up their ride home for you. But you're alive. But the next crossing doesn't have a hero's ending. In fact, it barely has heroes at all. Just a ship full of strangers from 6 different countries. Slowly, quietly, losing their minds in the darkness at the bottom of the world. You are standing on the deck of a ship called the Belgica, and you are fairly certain your captain has just done something unforgivable. Your name is Frederick Cook, American. You're 33 years old, and you're the ship's doctor, the only physician aboard a vessel that is, at this very moment, being swallowed by the Antarctic pack ice. The date is March 4th, 1898. The ice has closed around the Belgica like a fist, and the ship is going nowhere. Now, here's what makes this situation particularly interesting. Your captain, a Belgian naval officer named Adrien de Gerlach, may have done this on purpose. See, de Gerlach has been steering south for weeks, pushing deeper and deeper into the pack ice despite warnings from his officers, despite the pleas of his crew, despite the very obvious fact that ships trapped in Antarctic ice tend to stay trapped in Antarctic ice for a very long time. Some of the crew suspect he's deliberately trying to force an overwinter, that he wants the Belgica to become the first ship to spend a winter in Antarctic waters, whether his crew consents to that or not. If that's true, it's either visionary or criminal. And honestly, it might be both. The crew itself is a kind of miracle of dysfunction. De Gerlach assembled his team from 6 countries, apparently using the principle that if you can't find qualified volunteers, you should just collect interesting people and hope for the best. There's you, the American doctor. There's a young Norwegian first mate named Roald Amundsen. 25 years old, intense, quiet, burning with ambition. You don't know it yet, but this man will become the greatest polar explorer in history. Right now, though, he's just the first mate on a ship that's stuck. There's a Polish geophysicist named Antoni Dobrowolski, a Romanian zoologist named Emil Rakowita, a Belgian captain named Georges Lecointe, who's loyal to de Gerlach to a fault, and assorted sailors, mechanics, and deckhands who signed up for a scientific expedition and are now realizing they signed up for something considerably less voluntary. Several crew members deserted before the ship even reached Antarctica. Others proved insubordinate during the voyage south. This is, to put it kindly, not a well-oiled machine. This is... No, actually, assembling is too generous a word. This is like collecting people for the most dangerous mission on Earth, by recruiting at random from the back of several international bars and hoping nobody notices. And now you're all stuck. Together. In the ice. Indefinitely. The first few weeks aren't bad. The novelty of being trapped in Antarctica, the first humans ever to spend a winter this far south, provides a kind of grim entertainment. The scientists collect samples. The crew maintains the ship. You treat minor injuries and frostbite. The ice is beautiful in its way. Great pressure ridges of blue and white, sculpted by wind into shapes that look almost deliberate, as if the ice is building something. But then the sun begins to set, and it keeps setting. On May 17th, 1898, the sun drops below the horizon and does not come back. It will not rise again for 67 days. 67 days of unbroken darkness. Now, you've read about polar darkness. You've studied it, as much as anyone can study something they've never experienced. But reading about it and living in it are two completely different things. The darkness doesn't just surround you, it saturates you. It seeps into your thoughts, your dreams, your sense of time and space. Within weeks, you lose track of what day it is. Meals feel arbitrary. Sleep comes and goes without pattern. The boundary between being awake and being asleep begins to dissolve, and you're not always sure which side you're on. Your crewmates begin to change, not all at once, not dramatically, just shifts. Tollefson, one of the sailors, stops speaking, then stops eating, then begins making sounds that aren't words. He's descending into a kind of madness that you've never seen in any medical textbook. A madness born not of disease but of absence. The absence of light. The absence of change. The absence of any evidence that the world outside this ship still exists. Knudsen, another crew member, develops what you can only describe as a severe mental disturbance. He'll survive the expedition barely, but he'll die shortly after returning to civilization, his mind broken by those 67 days of darkness. And then there's the one who tries to walk home. One crewman, and the accounts vary on exactly who, becomes convinced that if he just walks far enough across the ice, he'll reach Belgium. Belgium, which is approximately 10,000 miles to the north, across the Southern Ocean, through the pack ice, past several continents. But in his mind, in the darkness, poisoned corridors of his thinking, it makes perfect sense. He just needs to walk. Just keep walking. Belgium is that way. He's stopped, brought back to the ship, sedated as much as you can sedate someone in 1898 with limited medical supplies. But the incident shakes everyone, because if he went mad, who's next? This is where you, Frederick Cook, ship's doctor, the only thing standing between this crew and complete psychological collapse, do something remarkable. You invent light therapy. You have no basis for this, no medical literature to support it, no precedent. But you've spent time in Greenland, living among the Inuit, and you noticed something. The Inuit gathered around bright fires during the dark months. They exposed their skin to flame light. They didn't do this for warmth alone. They did it for something else, something about the light itself. So you start stripping men naked and making them stand in front of the brightest fire you can build, using the ship's stove with the doors thrown open. You order them to face the light, to let it wash over their skin. You rotate them through in shifts. Every man, every day, standing in front of the fire like a bizarre and freezing form of sun worship. It works, not perfectly, not for everyone. But the crew begins to stabilize. The worst of the madness retreats. The men who were descending into darkness find a handhold, something to grip. And here's the thing that nobody knew in 1898, but every doctor knows now. Cook had accidentally invented a treatment for seasonal affective disorder. The light exposure was stimulating vitamin D production and resetting circadian rhythms. He didn't know the science. He just observed what the Inuit did, and he copied it. 120 years before light therapy became a standard treatment for winter depression, Frederick Cook was using it in the Antarctic. But light therapy alone won't save you, because now scurvy is coming. De Gerlach is sick. LeCointe is sick. Several crew members are developing the telltale signs: swollen gums, loose teeth, fatigue so profound it feels less like tiredness and more like being slowly erased. The ship's stores include tinned food and preserved meats, but what they lack is anything fresh. And without fresh food, the body begins to consume itself. Once again, you turn to what you learned from the Inuit. You order the crew to eat raw penguin and seal meat every day. Mandatory, no exceptions. This goes over about as well as you'd expect. The men hate it. Penguin meat tastes, by most accounts, like an oil lamp married a fish, and the child grew up to be disappointing. Seal meat is marginally better, but still a far cry from the bread and cheese and wine that the Belgian contingent is used to. But you're insistent. You're the doctor. And you're right. The scurvy retreats. The men who eat the raw meat recover. The ones who refuse continue to decline. De Gerlach, who is apparently too proud to eat penguin, nearly dies. Through all of this, you and Amundsen grow close. It's an unlikely friendship, the American doctor and the Norwegian first mate. But you share something that the rest of the crew doesn't have. Competence. Amundsen is watching everything, learning everything, filing away every detail about ice conditions, navigation, survival techniques, food preservation, and crew management. He's treating the Belgica like a school, and the lesson plan is how to not die in Antarctica. The two of you pull each other out of crevasses during shore excursions. You share watches. You discuss strategy late into the perpetual night. And when the time comes to escape the ice, it's your plan that saves everyone. Your idea is simple and audacious. Cut a channel through the ice. A canal, hundreds of meters long, from the ship to the nearest patch of open water. Using hand tools, saws, and explosives. It sounds insane. The ice is thick. The crew is weakened by months of darkness and malnutrition. But you don't see another option. The ice isn't going to let go on its own. Not this year. Maybe not next year either. The crew begins cutting. Day after day, week after week, they saw and hack and blast through the frozen sea. Progress is measured in meters. The channel fills with slush. The wind blows drift snow back into the trench. Some days you lose more ground than you gain. But you keep going, because the alternative is another winter in the ice, and you're not sure anyone would survive that. Not their bodies, not their minds. On March 14th, 1899, 13 months after the ice first closed around the Belgica, the ship squeezes through the channel and reaches open water. The crew stands on deck, blinking in the returning sunlight, looking at each other as if seeing strangers. You brought them home, all of them. Every maddened, scurvy-ridden, penguin-fed, near-mutinous one of them. And here's the part that haunts this story long after it ends. You, Frederick Cook, the man who invented light therapy, who cured scurvy with raw penguin, who cut a ship free from Antarctic ice with your bare hands, will go on to claim that you reached the North Pole in 1908. The claim will be disputed, then debunked. Your reputation will collapse. History will remember you as a fraud. But on the Belgica, in that darkness, in that ice, you were the man who saved everyone. And Amundsen, the first mate who was watching and learning, will use everything he learned from you to become the first person to reach the South Pole. He'll credit the Belgica experience for the rest of his life. Cook brought everyone home from the Belgica. 118 years later, another man would set out to cross Antarctica alone. And this time, the ice wouldn't let go. You have spent your entire adult life obsessed with a dead man. Well, not obsessed exactly. Devoted, haunted. Call it what you want. His name is Ernest Shackleton. He died in 1922 on a ship called the Quest, anchored off the coast of South Georgia Island. The same island where he'd walked out of the mountains and into a whaling station 6 years earlier, having crossed the most dangerous ocean on Earth in a 22-foot boat. Heart attack. 47 years old. His wife asked that he be buried there, on the island that had saved him, and so they did. He's still there, watching the ice. You know this because you've visited his grave more than once. You've stood on that cold hillside in South Georgia, looked at the simple stone marker, and felt something that you can't quite explain to your wife or your children, or anyone who hasn't been to the ice themselves. It's not worship. It's not obsession. Well, maybe it is obsession, but it's the useful kind, the kind that gives a life direction. Your name is Henry Worsley. You're 55 years old, British, retired Lieutenant Colonel in the British Army. You served in the Special Air Service, the SAS, which, if you're not familiar, is roughly the British equivalent of climbing inside a meat grinder voluntarily and coming out the other side. You've seen combat in the Balkans and the Middle East. You've commanded men in conditions that would break most people. But nothing you've done in the military has felt like what Shackleton must have felt. That weight. That responsibility. That impossible arithmetic of survival where you're the one doing the math and the numbers are human lives. So you've spent the last decade trying to understand it. Not from books, though you've read them all. Not from documentaries, though you've watched every frame. You've tried to understand Shackleton by doing what Shackleton did, by putting your body in the same cold, by dragging a sledge across the same ice, by standing in the same wind and asking yourself the same question that every polar explorer eventually asks. How far am I willing to go? In 2008, you led the Matrix Shackleton Centenary Expedition, 3 men retracing Shackleton's 1908 Nimrod route toward the South Pole, exactly 100 years later. You made it. All the way to the pole. You stood where Shackleton turned back, 97 miles short, and you kept going. Not because you were braver than Shackleton. Nobody thinks that, least of all you. But because modern equipment and knowledge allowed you to finish what he couldn't. In 2011, you did it again. The Scott Expedition, retracing Robert Falcon Scott's fatal 1912 route to the pole. You completed that one too, pulling a sledge over 900 miles. Once again, you stood at the pole and thought about the men who died trying to reach it a century earlier. 2 Antarctic expeditions, 2 successful crossings, 2 centenary tributes to the dead men who haunt you. And after the second one, most people would have stopped. You're in your 50s now. You have a wife, Joanna, and 2 children. You've proven whatever needed proving. You've paid your respects to the ghosts. But there's one more thing. One crossing that nobody has ever completed. And it's the one that Shackleton himself never got to attempt. The unassisted solo crossing of Antarctica. Now, let me explain what unassisted means in this context, because it matters. People have crossed Antarctica before. People have even crossed it solo. But they've used kites to catch the wind, or pre-positioned supply depots, or received airdrops of food and fuel along the way. Nobody has ever crossed the entire continent alone, under their own power, pulling everything they need from start to finish, with no help of any kind. You are going to try. Your sledge weighs 330 pounds. That is approximately the weight of a large refrigerator. You're going to drag a refrigerator across Antarctica. On purpose, for 1,100 miles, through temperatures that routinely drop below -40, in winds that can knock you off your feet. Alone. The route runs from the coast near Berkner Island, up through the Transantarctic Mountains, past the South Pole, and down to the Ross Ice Shelf on the other side. You estimate it will take about 80 days. You've packed food and fuel for 90, because you've been to the ice before, and you know that the ice doesn't care about your estimates. You're doing this for the Endeavour Fund, a charity you helped establish to support wounded British military veterans. Every mile you ski generates donations. Every mile is an act of service, just as your entire career has been. The goal is to raise at least £100,000. On November 13th, 2015, you set out from the edge of Antarctica. It's a Friday. Your wife watches your GPS tracker from England, a small dot inching across a white screen, moving south at the pace of a walking human, pulling a refrigerator. The first days are brutal but manageable. You've done this before. You know the rhythm. Wake at 6, melt snow for water, Eat a high-calorie breakfast of porridge and butter. Pack the sledge, clip into the harness, and ski. 8 hours, 10 hours, however many hours the weather allows. The sledge fights you. 330 pounds on a rope attached to your hips, dragging through sastrugi, wind-carved ridges of hard snow that catch the runners and jerk you backward. Every step is a negotiation between your body and the ice. The ice always wants more. But you're moving, and moving in Antarctica is everything. The days pass. You cross the coast and begin the long climb toward the polar plateau. The elevation increases from sea level to over 9,000 feet, and with it, the difficulty. Each step requires more effort. The air thins, the cold deepens. Your sledge, though lighter now as you consume food and fuel, still feels like an anchor chained to your spine. You keep a journal, audio recordings mostly, spoken into a small device at the end of each day. Your voice is tired but precise, the voice of a military man delivering a situation report to an audience of ghosts. Day 14, covered 12 miles, conditions marginal, sastrugi brutal. Right knee is protesting but holding. Day 23, whiteout conditions, could see nothing, skied on compass bearing. The loneliness is manageable. I talk to Shackleton sometimes. He doesn't answer, but that's fine. Christmas Day, 2015. You're somewhere on the polar plateau, surrounded by nothing. You allow yourself a small celebration, an extra ration of chocolate, a few minutes of rest. You think about Joanna and the children. You think about the veterans whose donations are adding up. You think about Shackleton, spending his own Christmases on the ice a century ago, and you wonder if he felt this same strange mixture of purpose and loneliness. You keep going. Day 30, day 40, day 50. You pass the South Pole. A brief, surreal interlude where you ski past the Amundsen Scott Research Station, exchange a few words with the staff, and continue on. You don't linger. Lingering is dangerous. Not because of the cold, but because comfort is a trap. If you stop moving, really stop, you might not start again. The second half of the crossing is supposed to be easier. Downhill in theory. But downhill in Antarctica is a relative concept. The surface is still sastrugi. The wind is now in your face, and your body is sending you messages that you have spent your entire military career learning to ignore. Something is wrong. You feel it first as exhaustion that doesn't respond to rest. You sleep, and you wake up more tired than when you lay down. You eat, and the calories seem to vanish into a void. Your stomach churns. Your energy drops. You adjust your rations. You slow your pace. You tell yourself it's just the altitude, or the cold, or the accumulated fatigue of 60-plus days of solo skiing. But you know, somewhere in the part of your brain that has been monitoring your body since your first day in the military, you know that this isn't normal fatigue. This is something else. Day 60. You've covered over 800 miles. You're still moving, but slower now. The daily distances that once measured 12 or 14 miles have shrunk to 8. Then 6. Your recordings become shorter, more strained. Day 63. Difficult day. Very difficult. Body not cooperating. But the fund is over £100,000 now. That matters. That matters more than I do. Day 65, Day 66, Day 67. Each one harder than the last. The ice doesn't change. It's the same wind, the same cold, the same endless white. But you are changing. You can feel yourself being diminished, as if the continent is taking small pieces of you with each mile and not giving them back. And here's the cruelest arithmetic of this story. You know exactly how far you have left. You can calculate it to the mile. And the number is small. Impossibly, heartbreakingly small. 30 miles. You are 30 miles from the finish. 30 miles is a day and a half of normal skiing. It's the distance from central London to the coast. It's nothing. It's everything. It's the distance between completing the greatest solo Antarctic crossing in history and becoming another name on the list of people who almost made it. Day 69, January 21st, 2016. You have covered 913 miles in 71 days. You are lying in your tent. You cannot stand. You have tried. Your body will not cooperate. The thing that is wrong inside you, the thing you've been ignoring, managing, negotiating with for days, has stopped negotiating. You know what you need to do. You've known for at least 3 days. But you are Henry Worsley, and Henry Worsley does not stop. Henry Worsley has spent his entire life finishing things, finishing selections, finishing tours, finishing expeditions, finishing what the dead men started. But you cannot stand up. You lie in the tent for hours. The wind shakes the fabric. The cold presses in from every direction. And you think about the decision that Shackleton made in 1909 when he turned back 97 miles from the pole. You've read his words 100 times. Better a live donkey than a dead lion. Shackleton chose life over glory. He walked away from the prize because his men's lives mattered more. You don't have men. You're alone. The only life at stake is yours. But there's Joanna. There are the children. There are the veterans who've donated over £100,000 because they believe in you. And there is the truth, the cold, clinical, military truth, that your body is failing in a way that rest and food and willpower cannot fix. You activate the satellite phone, you call your contact, and you say the words that must feel like swallowing broken glass. My journey is at an end. The rescue team arrives by plane. They load you onto the aircraft and fly you to Punta Arenas, Chile, the southernmost city in the world. The doctors examine you. The diagnosis comes quickly, and it is devastating. Bacterial peritonitis, an infection in the lining of your abdominal cavity. Your intestines, weakened by weeks of extreme exertion and insufficient nutrition, have developed a perforation. Bacteria have been leaking into your abdomen. That's what you felt. That exhaustion, that wrongness, that sense of being consumed from within. Your body wasn't just tired. It was poisoning itself. They operate immediately. The surgery is extensive. The infection has spread. Your organs, stressed beyond their limits by 71 days of Antarctic crossing, are struggling to function. On January 24th, 2016, 3 days after you activated the rescue beacon, your organs fail. You die in a hospital in Punta Arenas. You are 55 years old. 30 miles. Now, here's what the newspapers will report. They'll say You died attempting to cross Antarctica. They'll call you brave, which you were. They'll call it a tragedy, which it was. Prince William, whom you knew personally, will deliver a tribute. Your ashes will be interred near Shackleton's grave on South Georgia Island, near the man you spent your life chasing, in the ground that both of you loved more than was probably wise. The Endeavour Fund will ultimately raise over £200,000. Wounded veterans will receive support that might not have existed without your crossing. The charity will continue, fueled by your name and your story, and the number that everyone remembers: 30 miles. But here's what the newspapers won't say, what nobody says, because it's too uncomfortable, too close to the question that everyone who's ever pushed themselves too far would rather not answer. Did you know? Did you know in those final days that continuing might kill you? That the thing wrong inside you was more than fatigue? That 30 miles at the speed you were travelling might as well have been 30,000? The answer, almost certainly, is yes. You were a soldier. You understood your body the way a pilot understands an aircraft, by the instruments, by the sounds, by the subtle vibrations that tell you something isn't right. You knew, and you kept going anyway, not out of recklessness. You had 71 days of careful, disciplined, measured progress to prove that. But because the arithmetic of your life had always been simple, the mission matters more than the man. The cause matters more than the cost. Shackleton turned back. You didn't. And the terrible truth is that both decisions were heroic. And both decisions were right. And the only difference between them is that Shackleton had 27 other lives to protect, and you had only your own. And maybe your own wasn't enough to stop you. Robert Falcon. Scott died 11 miles from a supply depot. Shackleton turned back 97 miles from the pole. You made it to within 30 miles of the far edge of Antarctica. The ice measures everything in distance. The distance to safety, the distance to glory, the distance between a life that continues and one that doesn't. And every explorer eventually learns that those distances aren't the same thing. Henry Worsley's ashes rest on South Georgia Island, near the grave of Ernest Shackleton. If you visit, and you should someday, if the world allows it, you'll find two men who loved the ice more than they feared it. One of them came home, one of them didn't, but both of them finished their journey. Now, Worsley died trying to finish what Shackleton started. He died in a hospital, in a modern city, with surgeons and antibiotics and everything the 21st century could offer. The ice still won. But there's one more crossing left tonight. And this one, well, this one is different. Because the man at the center of it didn't just survive the Arctic. He lived there. He married there. He lost his toes there. He fought Nazis there. He won a game show about the ocean. And at one point, and I need you to prepare yourself for this, he carved a dagger out of his own frozen. Well, you'll see. You are 6 feet 7 inches tall, and you are absolutely certain that the Arctic is trying to kill you. This is not a new feeling. The Arctic has been trying to kill you for about 15 years now, with varying degrees of enthusiasm, and so far you've won every round. You have survived blizzards that buried entire settlements. You have survived frostbite that turned your toes the color of old charcoal. You have survived starvation, hypothermia, gangrene, and one incident involving a polar bear that you'd rather not discuss in polite company. But this time is different, because this time you're buried alive. Your name is Peter Freuchen. You're Danish. Born in Nykøbing Falster in 1886, you were supposed to be a doctor. Your parents sent you to the University of Copenhagen to study medicine. And you tried, you really did. But somewhere between your anatomy lectures and your surgical rotations, you happened to read an account of Arctic exploration, and your entire life changed direction with the force of a compass needle swinging north. You dropped out of medical school. Your parents were not pleased. You got yourself onto a Danish expedition to Greenland in 1906 at the age of 20, and from that moment forward, you never really came home. Not in the way your parents hoped. Not in the way the medical school expected. You found a different kind of life, one that involved dog sleds and walrus hunting and temperatures that would make a thermometer weep. And you found Knud Rasmussen. Now, Rasmussen. If you haven't heard of him, you should have. Knud Rasmussen was half Danish, half Greenlandic Inuit, the first European-born person with Inuit ancestry to explore the Arctic. He was charismatic, brilliant, tireless, and possessed of a vision that most people would have called insane. He wanted to establish a trading post at the very top of the world, a place where the Inuit could trade furs and ivory without being exploited by southern merchants. In 1910, you and Rasmussen founded the Thule Trading Station in northwestern Greenland. Thule, named after Ultima Thule, the mythical edge of the known world, because that's where you were, the northernmost permanent trading post on Earth. The last outpost of human commerce before the ice took over and didn't give anything back. You were 24 years old. You were running a trading post at the end of the world, and you loved it. You didn't just live among the Inuit. You became one of them, or as close as a 6'7" Dane could. You learned their language. You learned to drive dog teams. You learned to build snow shelters and hunt seal and navigate by the stars in months of perpetual darkness. You ate what they ate. You traveled how they traveled. You understood, in a way that most European explorers never did, that the Inuit weren't surviving the Arctic despite its hostility. They were living in partnership with it. And then you married into it. Her name was Navarana, an Inuit woman who was, by all accounts, as remarkable as you were. Strong, intelligent, fearless. She traveled with you on expeditions. She gave birth to your 2 children in conditions that would have sent most European mothers into medical shock. She was your partner in the fullest sense of the word, and the years you spent together in Greenland were, by your own account, the happiest of your life. In 1912, you and Rasmussen launched the first Thule expedition, a 1,000-kilometer crossing of the Greenland ice cap that would later be called the finest journey ever performed by dogs. You nearly died, several times. The ice crevasses alone should have killed you, but you made it across, and the expedition produced scientific data about Greenland's interior that wouldn't be surpassed for decades. This is the part of Peter Freuchen's life where a normal person would have started thinking about retirement. You're in your late 20s. You've crossed Greenland. You've built a trading post at the top of the world. You've married the woman you love, You have children. But you are not a normal person. You are Peter Freuchen. And Peter Freuchen's life has a very different relationship with the concept of enough. The avalanche happens on one of the later Thule expeditions. You're traveling alone, or with dogs, which in the Arctic counts as alone, when the weather turns. A blizzard descends, the kind that erases the boundary between sky and ground, between up and down, between alive and dead. You hunker down to wait it out, and then the snow collapses. You're buried, completely. The weight of the snow presses down on your body like a frozen coffin. You can't move your arms. You can barely breathe. The snow around you is packed so tightly that it might as well be concrete. You try to dig with your hands. No good. Your gloves are frozen. Your fingers won't respond, and the snow is too hard. You try to shift your body, create space. The snow gives nothing. You're running out of air. The darkness is absolute. And then you have an idea. An idea that, look, there's no elegant way to say this. You're going to have to bear with me. You defecate. And then you wait for it to freeze. It freezes. You shape it into a dagger. A chisel, really. A pointed implement hard enough to chip through compressed snow and ice. And then you carve your way out. Your frozen feces dagger is, to be clear, not in any survival manual. It has never been recommended by any wilderness expert. It doesn't appear on any list of emergency tools. There are no patents pending. And yet, it worked. You carved through the snow above your head, inch by inch, until you broke through to the surface and crawled out into the blizzard, gasping and alive, and holding the most improbable tool in the history of human survival. If this story sounds made up, I understand. It was actually tested by researchers in 2019 who froze human feces and attempted to use the resulting implement to cut through animal hide. Their results were mixed. But they didn't have your motivation. They weren't buried alive in an Arctic blizzard with no other options. And motivation, it turns out, is a remarkable adhesive. You survive the avalanche. But the Arctic isn't done with you. It's never done with you. The frostbite comes for your feet. Not all at once. The Arctic is patient. It starts with your toes. They turn white, then purple, then the dark mottled black that means the tissue is dead. You know what dead tissue means. You studied medicine once. Dead tissue means gangrene, and gangrene means amputation. And amputation in an Arctic trading post means doing it yourself. So you do. You take your toes off. With pliers. The pain is, well, you don't talk about it much in your memoirs, which tells you everything you need to know about how bad it was. You wrap the stumps. You keep working. You keep traveling. You lose more of the foot. Eventually, years later, you'll lose the entire leg. It will be replaced with a wooden prosthetic, and you'll walk on it for the rest of your life with a limp that becomes as much a part of your identity as your enormous height. But you don't stop. The concept of stopping doesn't seem to exist in your vocabulary. Navarana dies in 1921, during the Spanish flu pandemic that has ravaged even the remote communities of Greenland. You are devastated. The woman who shared your life at the edge of the world is gone, and the Arctic suddenly feels less like a home and more like a place where everything you love gets taken away. You eventually leave Greenland. Not forever. You'll return, always, because you're Peter Freuchen, and the Arctic owns a piece of you that no amount of civilization can reclaim. But you begin a new chapter. You marry again, a Danish woman named Magdalene. You write books. You give lectures. You become, in the language of the early 20th century, a celebrity explorer. And then the Nazis arrive. It's 1940. Germany occupies Denmark. You're in your 50s. You have one leg. You are, by any reasonable assessment, in no condition to join a resistance movement. But reasonable assessments have never been your strong suit. You join the Danish resistance anyway. You help Jewish refugees escape to Sweden. You use your contacts, your knowledge of remote routes, your sheer physical presence. You're still 6'7", even with one leg, to smuggle people out of occupied territory. The Germans don't appreciate this. They arrest you. They sentence you to death. Now, being sentenced to death by the Nazi occupation forces is, for most people, the end of the story. But you are Peter Freuchen, and Peter Freuchen has been sentenced to death by the Arctic approximately 17 times. So one more death sentence barely registers. You escape. The details are murky. Accounts differ on exactly how, but the consensus is that you used a combination of luck, audacity, and the kind of physical courage that only a man who once carved himself out of an avalanche with a feces dagger could muster. You make it to Sweden. From Sweden, you make it to America. You settle in New York. And here's where the story takes its most absurd turn. Because Peter Freuchen, Arctic explorer, Thule trading post founder, resistance fighter, one-legged man who escaped a Nazi death sentence, goes on a game show. It's 1956. The show is called The $64,000 Question, the most popular quiz show in America. Contestants choose a subject and answer increasingly difficult questions for escalating prize money. You choose your subject, the 7 Seas. The audience does not know that you have personally sailed across, capsized in, or nearly drowned in most of the world's oceans. They do not know about the Arctic crossings, the Antarctic lectures, the years spent on ships between Greenland and Denmark. They see a tall, older man with a wooden leg and a thick accent. You answer every question correctly. You win $64,000, the maximum prize. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $500,000. You win a game show about the ocean. Because of course you do. Because you're Peter Freuchen. And the universe has apparently decided that your life story needs to include every possible genre of human experience. Explorer, trader, husband, father, author, amputee, resistance fighter, fugitive, game show champion. And through all of it, beneath all of it, the thing that defined you from the age of 20 until the day you died, a man of the ice. A man who understood that the Arctic wasn't an enemy to be conquered or a puzzle to be solved. It was a world, a complete, functioning, beautiful, terrifying world. And you lived in it. Not as a visitor, not as a conqueror, as a resident. Peter Freuchen died on September 2nd, 1957, of a heart attack at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. He was 71 years old. He was, at the time of his death, en route to give a lecture about the Arctic, because of course he was. He was going back. He was always going back. His ashes were scattered at the base of Mount Dundas, near the Thule trading post he founded 47 years earlier, near the edge of the known world. Near the place where a 24-year-old medical school dropout decided that the most interesting thing a person could do was live at the boundary between the possible and the impossible and see which side won. Both sides won. That's the thing about Peter Freuchen. He didn't beat the Arctic. The Arctic didn't beat him. They just coexisted. Two enormous forces, each too stubborn to yield, each too fascinated by the other to walk away, until one of them stopped, and the other kept going the way the Arctic always does. The ice remembers everything, and somewhere near Thule, in the wind that never stops, it remembers a man who was 6'7" and missing a leg and absolutely, categorically, the most interesting person who ever lived. Now, Freuchen lived at the edge of the world for 15 years. He chose it. He married into it. He made the Arctic his home. But the next crossing takes you back to a very different kind of Arctic experience. Because the people in this story didn't choose the ice. The ice chose them. And then their leader walked away. You've heard this name before. Vilhjálmur Stefansson, the man who sent Ada Blackjack to Wrangel Island and stayed in New York. Well, 2 years before Ada's expedition, Stefansson pulled the same trick on a much larger scale. And this time, a captain with a Victrola and an impossible amount of courage was the only thing standing between his abandoned crew and total annihilation. You hear the music before you understand what's happening. It's January 11th, 1914. You're standing on the pack ice of the Arctic Ocean, about 200 miles north of the Siberian coast, watching your ship die. The Karluk, a former fishing vessel, a whaling ship repurposed for exploration, a boat whose name means fish in the Aleut language, is being crushed by the ice. Slowly, methodically, the way the Arctic crushes everything eventually. The hull is breached. Water is flooding the lower decks. The ice has punched through the wooden planks like a fist through wet paper. And the Karluk is listing, sinking, well, not quite sinking yet, but groaning with the sounds of a living thing in its final moments. And your captain is playing music. Robert Bartlett, Captain Bob as the crew calls him, is standing on the tilting deck with the ship's Victrola. He's wound it up, set the needle on a record, and now Chopin's Funeral March is floating across the Arctic ice. Tinny and beautiful and completely, perfectly insane. The music drifts over the pressure ridges, and the supply caches, and the dogs, and the crew members standing in clusters on the ice, watching their shelter and their transportation, and their connection to the civilized world, disappear beneath the frozen sea. Bartlett plays the record all the way through. Then he steps off the ship. The Karluk sinks at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Your name doesn't matter right now, because there are 25 of you standing on this ice, and the story that's about to unfold will scatter your fates like cards thrown into a blizzard. Some of you will live, some of you will die. One of you will be found dead from a gunshot wound, and nobody will ever determine whether it was murder or suicide. But all of you, right now, in this moment, are watching the same thing, A ship going down while Chopin plays. How did you get here? That story begins with a man you already know. A man whose name has come up before in these crossings. Vilhjalmur Stephenson. Remember him? The Canadian explorer who organized Ada Blackjack's expedition to Wrangel Island and then stayed home in New York. The man who promised everyone would be fine, and then wasn't there. Well, he's done it again. The Canadian Arctic expedition of 1913 was Stephenson's grand vision. A major government-funded expedition to explore and map the northern coast of Canada and the islands beyond. Stephenson was the leader. The Karluk was the flagship. Captain Bartlett was hired to navigate through the ice. But from the very beginning, Bartlett had doubts. The Karluk was old. She'd been built for fishing, not for ice navigation. Her hull wasn't reinforced the way a proper Arctic vessel should be. Bartlett said as much. Stephenson didn't listen. Stephenson rarely listened when other people's opinions contradicted his plans. On August 13th, 1913, the Karluk became trapped in the pack ice of the Beaufort Sea, about 225 miles northwest of Alaska. The ice closed around her like a jaw, and she began to drift, slowly, helplessly, carried by currents she couldn't fight and wind she couldn't resist. And then Stephenson left. On September 20th, 1913, Vilhjalmur Stephenson, the expedition leader, the man responsible for the lives of everyone aboard, departed the trapped Karluk with a small hunting party. He said he was going to hunt caribou. He walked off across the ice toward the Alaskan coast, and he never came back. He just left. Now, Stephenson's defenders would later say he was cut off by shifting ice, that he couldn't return to the ship even if he wanted to. Maybe that's true, but the timing was suspicious, the excuse was thin, and the result was undeniable. 30 people were trapped on a sinking ship in the Arctic, and their leader had walked away. Bartlett was left in command, and Bartlett, stubborn, competent, prepared for the worst in the way that only career Arctic sailors can be, had been quietly planning for disaster since the day the ice closed in. Weeks before the Karluk sank, Bartlett had ordered the crew to transfer supplies onto the ice. Food, fuel, ammunition, building materials, dog harnesses, everything they might need if the ship went down. He had them build igloos on the ice nearby. He organized the supplies into caches. He was essentially building a lifeboat out of frozen seawater and willpower. So when the Karluk finally sank on January 11th, to the sounds of Chopin, because Bartlett understood that even disasters deserve a soundtrack, the crew wasn't entirely unprepared. They had shelter, they had food, they had dogs and sledges and rifles. What they didn't have was any way home. The drift of the ice had carried them far from land. The nearest solid ground was Wrangel Island. Yes, the same Wrangel Island where Ada Blackjack would be stranded 7 years later, about 150 miles to the southwest. Bartlett organized a march. The journey across the pack ice to Wrangel Island was brutal. The ice was unstable, cracked with leads of open water, buckled into pressure ridges that towered above the sledges. The temperature hovered around -30. The dogs struggled. The men struggled more. But they made it. Most of them, By early March 1914, the majority of the Karluk's crew was on Wrangel Island, living in shelters they'd built from driftwood and snow, hunting whatever game they could find. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't safe. But it was land. And then Bartlett did something that separates him from every other character in this story. Something that puts him in the same category as Shackleton, as Mawson, as the handful of people who looked at an impossible situation and said, "I'll go get help." He walked to Siberia. Bartlett took one companion, an Inupiat hunter named Kataktovik, and set out across the frozen Chukchi Sea toward the Siberian coast. The distance was approximately 700 miles, across drifting, cracking, shifting sea ice, in the dead of Arctic winter, with a dog team, a sledge, and whatever food they could carry. 700 miles. Let that number settle. That's roughly the distance from New York to Chicago. Bartlett and Kataktovik covered it on foot, navigating by dead reckoning, sleeping in snow shelters they built each night, eating what they could hunt along the way. When the ice opened into leads of black water, they detoured. When pressure ridges blocked their path, they hauled the sledge over by hand. When storms pinned them down, they waited. And when the storms passed, they kept walking. They reached the Siberian coast in April. Then Bartlett traveled down the coast, by dog sled, by boat, by any means available, to find a settlement with a telegraph. It took weeks. The Siberian coast in 1914 was not exactly bristling with communication infrastructure. But he made it, and on a day in May that nobody aboard the Karluk could have predicted, a wireless message crackled across the Arctic. The survivors were alive. They were on Wrangel Island. They needed rescue. The rescue ship didn't arrive until September. The survivors had been on Wrangel Island for more than 6 months, half-starved, frostbitten, isolated, deteriorating in body and mind. By the time the rescue came, 11 of the original 28 expedition members were dead. Some had died on the ice march. Some had died on Wrangel Island from exposure, starvation, and disease. One had died from a gunshot wound that was never satisfactorily explained. But 14 survived. Because Bartlett walked 700 miles across a frozen ocean. Because he played Chopin as his ship went down and then picked up his feet and started walking. Stefansson naturally continued his career. He wrote books. He gave lectures. He promoted the concept of the friendly Arctic, the idea that the polar regions were hospitable to those who knew how to live there. The survivors of the Karluk might have had some thoughts about that title. Bartlett went on to lead dozens more Arctic expeditions. He became one of the most respected ice navigators in history. When he died in 1946, he was 80 years old and had spent more time in the Arctic than most people spend awake. His legacy was simple. When the ship went down, he played the music, and then he walked home. Some crossings are measured in miles. Bartlett's was measured in 700 of them, and every single one was earned with frozen feet and a compass that pointed toward people he refused to let die. Now, Bartlett walked across the ice to save his crew. But the next crossing takes you to a place where the ice isn't the enemy. The enemy is hunger. The enemy is the man sitting next to you, stealing food from the supply cache in the middle of the night. And the question isn't whether you'll survive. The question is what you're willing to do. and what you're willing to order. When survival means something far darker than any blizzard. You are standing in a tent at Cape Sabine, and you are about to order a man's death. Or rather, you are about to do what 3 years of Arctic Command have been building toward. Your name is Adolphus Washington Greeley. First Lieutenant, United States Army Signal Corps. You are 40 years old. You are commanding what remains of the Lady Franklin Bay expedition. 25 men sent to the high Canadian Arctic to establish a weather station and conduct scientific observations. That was 3 years ago. Now there are 18 of you left. By next week there will be fewer. You didn't come here to be a hero. You came here because the United States Army told you to. In 1881, you were ordered to establish a meteorological station at Fort Conger, on the northern tip of Ellesmere Island, one of the most remote outposts on Earth, roughly 600 miles from the North Pole. Your men would observe weather patterns, measure tidal flows, study magnetism. Science. Routine. Important, but not dramatic. For 2 years it wasn't dramatic. Your men built the station. They took their readings. They hunted musk oxen and Arctic hare. Lieutenant Lockwood and Sergeant Brainard even set out on a side expedition and achieved a new farthest north record, 83 degrees 24 minutes north, breaking a mark that had stood for 300 years. You were proud of them. The expedition was going well. Then the resupply ships didn't come. The plan had always been simple. You would stay at Fort Conger for 2 years. A ship would bring supplies and replacements each summer. After the second year, a ship would bring everyone home. Standard Arctic logistics. The Navy had done this before. In the summer of 1882, the first resupply ship was forced back by ice. It never reached you. Disappointing, but not catastrophic. You had enough supplies for another year. In the summer of 1883, the second resupply ship was crushed by ice and sank. The Navy managed to cache a small amount of supplies at several points along the coast to the south, in case you needed to retreat. But the cache at your designated fallback point, Cape Sabine, contained only a few weeks' worth of food. Nobody told you this. Nobody could. Your orders were clear. If not relieved by the summer of 1883, retreat south to Cape Sabine and wait for rescue. So you did. You loaded your men into small boats and began the agonizing journey south, through the ice-choked channels of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. It took weeks. The boats were small, the ice was treacherous, and the weather was deteriorating. You arrived at Cape Sabine in October 1883. You found the supply cache, and when you counted the rations, the number was catastrophic. A few weeks' worth of food for 25 men, with at least 8 months until a rescue ship could possibly reach you. The mathematics of starvation are simple and merciless. You calculate the calories available. You calculate the calories needed. You divide the food into daily rations so small that eating them feels more like a ritual than a meal. Each man receives roughly 100 calories per day, about what a modern person would get from half a banana. You supplement this with tiny shrimp caught through holes in the ice, with lichens scraped from rocks, with seaweed and anything else that might contain the faintest trace of nutrition. It isn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The men begin to die in January 1884, slowly at first, then faster. The progression of starvation is a clinical horror. First, the body consumes its fat reserves, then its muscle tissue, then its organs begin to fail. The men lose weight at a rate that makes them unrecognizable within weeks. Their eyes sink into their skulls. Their skin hangs loose. They develop sores that won't heal, infections that the body can no longer fight. And then there's Private Henry. Charles B. Henry, not his real name. He'd enlisted under an alias. His real name was Charles Buck, and he had a record of dishonorable behavior. Is stealing food. You know this. Everyone knows this in a camp where every calorie is the difference between one more day alive and one more death. Henry is taking more than his share. He's been caught multiple times. He's been warned. He's been threatened. He doesn't stop. Now, think about what this means, not abstractly, not morally, practically. Every ounce of food that Henry steals is an ounce that doesn't go to someone else. In a camp where men are literally dying of starvation, food theft isn't just a crime, it's murder by redistribution. Every stolen biscuit might be the difference between someone else lasting one more day or not. You've spent weeks agonizing over this. You are a military man. You believe in rules, in order, in the chain of command. But you also believe in the survival of the group. And Private Henry is a threat to the group's survival, as real as any blizzard or any crack in the ice. On June 6, 1884, you give the order. Private Henry is taken outside the shelter. He is shot twice in the back. The official report will say he was killed by 2 balls taking effect and producing instant death. The unofficial record is considerably more complicated. Decades later, one of the survivors will claim that Henry was innocent, that Greeley himself was the true thief, that the execution was a cover-up. The truth, like most truths at the edge of the world, is probably somewhere in the middle, buried under ice and silence and the desperate mathematics of who deserves to live. The deaths continue. Sergeant Rice dies. Lieutenant Kislingberry dies. Dr. Pavey, the only man with Arctic experience, the one who should have been prepared for this, dies of starvation like everyone else. His medical knowledge is useless when there's nothing to eat. By late June 1884, only 7 of your 25 men are alive. 7. You among them. All of you are hours from death. One of the survivors is so weak that when the rescue ship finally appears, he's found waving a tattered piece of underwear on a pole, the only thing he can lift as a signal. The rescue comes on June 22, 1884. The ship Thetis, dispatched by the Navy after the full scale of the disaster became apparent. Commander Winfield Schley leads the rescue party ashore. What he finds will become front-page news across America. The 7 survivors are barely alive. They are skeletal, frostbitten, incoherent. Some cannot stand. Some cannot speak. They have been eating leather bootstraps and candle wax. And the bodies? The bodies tell a story that nobody wants to believe. The rescue party finds that flesh has been cut from the remains of at least 7 of the dead. Lieutenant Kislingberry, William Ellis, others. The cuts are deliberate, methodical, done with a knife, not by animals. The survivors deny knowledge, every single one of them. When the New York Times publishes the story, the word cannibalism appears in the headline, and Adolphus Greely's reputation, the reputation of a man who kept meticulous scientific records through 3 years of Arctic isolation, who ordered an execution to protect his men, who maintained military discipline until the very end, is destroyed. Or not destroyed, complicated, because Greely goes on to live another 51 years. He commands the relief operation after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. He's promoted to Major General. In 1935, just before his death at the age of 91, he's awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, one of only 2 ever given for non-combat service. The Arctic ate most of his men. The newspapers ate his reputation. And Greely just kept going. Because that's what you do. You order the execution. You eat whatever is available. You wave your underwear on a pole when the ship appears. And you spend the rest of your life trying to reconcile the person you were before Cape Sabine with the person you became during it. Some crossings change the landscape. Some crossings change the person. And some crossings, the ones at Cape Sabine, in the darkness, with the mathematics of starvation pressing down on you like ice on a hull, change everything about what you thought you were capable of. But there's one more crossing left tonight. And this one is the strangest of all. Because you're not going to cross the Arctic on foot, or by ship, or by sledge. You're going to cross it in a balloon, a hydrogen balloon, and everyone is going to tell you it's a terrible idea, and you're going to do it anyway. You are going to fly to the North Pole, not by airplane. That hasn't been invented yet, not really, not in any form that could survive the Arctic. Not by airship. The rigid dirigibles that will later cross oceans are still decades away. You're going to fly there in a hydrogen balloon, a silken varnish sphere filled with gas, steered by drag ropes trailing through the ice, powered by nothing but wind and optimism, and the unshakable conviction that you, Salomon August-André, have solved a problem that every other explorer has been approaching wrong. Everyone else walks. Everyone else sails. Everyone else hauls sledges across the ice and freezes their extremities and eats pemmican and suffers. But you, Swedish engineer, member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, aeronaut, dreamer, you are going to float to the pole, elegantly, scientifically, above the suffering. It is quite possibly, no, definitely, the worst idea in the history of exploration, and you are going to do it anyway. The year is 1897. You're 43 years old. You've spent the last several years developing your theory of Arctic balloon flight and testing it with smaller balloons over Sweden. Your concept is straightforward, at least on paper. A large hydrogen balloon. You've named yours the Ornan, the Eagle. Will carry 3 men and enough supplies for several months. Drag ropes trailing beneath the balloon and dragging across the ice surface will provide steering. You'll fly from Svalbard to the North Pole and beyond, landing somewhere in Alaska or Canada or Russia. King Oscar II has given you 30,000 kroner. Alfred Nobel himself, yes, that Nobel, the dynamite inventor, has contributed funding. The Swedish public adores you. You are the face of modern scientific exploration. The man who will prove that brains can triumph where brute force has failed. There is one problem, well, several problems, but the main one is this: your balloon leaks. Your colleague Niels Ekholm, the meteorologist assigned to the expedition, has tested the balloon. His findings are unambiguous. The Eagle loses hydrogen at a rate that will make sustained flight impossible. The seams weep gas. The varnish coating is insufficient. The balloon will deflate faster than the wind can carry it. Ekholm tells you this. You don't listen. Ekholm quits the expedition. You replace him with a young photographer named Niels Strindberg, who is 24 years old and in love with a woman named Anna, and has no idea that the photograph he takes of himself before departure will be the last image of him alive for 33 years. Your first attempt in 1896 fails before it begins. The winds at your Svalbard launch site blow from the wrong direction for weeks, and you can't launch into a headwind. You go home, you wait, you come back the next year. On July 11th, 1897, the wind finally cooperates. The balloon is inflated. The basket is loaded with provisions, scientific instruments, carrier pigeons, and enough food for several months. You climb in with Strindberg and your third companion, Knut Frenkel. The ground crew releases the ropes. The Eagle rises. And immediately, things go wrong. The drag ropes, your ingenious steering mechanism, the whole basis of your navigational theory, snag on the launch equipment. 2 of the 3 ropes tear free and fall to the ground. Without them, the balloon catapults upward, far higher than planned, into colder air that contracts the hydrogen and puts stress on seams that are already compromised. You are, in the first 30 seconds of your flight, effectively unsteerable and leaking. But you're flying. You're flying over the Arctic. Below you, the ice stretches to every horizon, white and blue and impossibly vast. The silence is extraordinary. No engine noise, no wind in rigging. Just the creak of the basket and the whisper of gas escaping through seams that should have been better sealed. For 65 hours, you fly, 2.5 days, drifting north-northeast over the pack ice. You release carrier pigeons with messages. You drop buoys containing notes about your position. You take observations and record them in your journal with the meticulous precision of a man who believes his data will matter. But the balloon is sinking. The hydrogen loss is constant and irreversible. The Eagle descends slowly, inevitably touching the ice with its basket, bouncing up, dragging across pressure ridges, bouncing again. The drag ropes, the ones you have left, catch and tangle. The balloon becomes less a flying machine and more a very expensive tent being dragged across the ice by diminishing lift. On July 14th, 1897, 65 hours and 295 miles after launch, the Eagle comes down for the last time. You, Strindberg, and Frenkel step out onto the pack ice. The balloon collapses behind you like a deflated dream. You are hundreds of miles from civilization, inadequately dressed, carrying supplies meant for aerial travel, standing on ice that is drifting in a direction you cannot control. You are, to use a technical term, in very serious trouble. What follows is 2 months of survival that nobody will know about for 33 years. Because no one knows where you are. No one will find you. The carrier pigeons either don't arrive or carry messages that provide no useful location data. The boys drift. The world assumes you've flown to glory or death, and slowly, reluctantly, accepts that it's probably the latter. But you're alive, all three of you, standing on ice that is simultaneously your prison and your only floor. You begin to walk. The plan is to head south toward Franz Josef Land, a Russian archipelago where supplies have been cached for various expeditions. You drag sledges loaded with your balloon supplies, food, a tent, weapons, Strindberg's camera equipment. The ice is difficult, pressure ridges, leads of open water, surfaces that vary from hard blue ice to soft deep snow that swallows your boots. You hunt polar bears. This is both necessary and dangerous. Polar bears in the Arctic are the apex predator, and the boundary between hunting and being hunted is disturbingly thin. But bear meat provides calories, and calories are the currency of survival. You eat the meat, some of it undercooked. This detail will matter later. The weeks pass. August, September. The ice drifts, carrying you in directions you didn't choose. Your progress toward Franz Josef Land is negated by the current. You walk south, and the ice carries you east. The math stops working. By September, you've abandoned the plan to reach Franz Josef Land. Instead, you've drifted toward Kvitoya, White Island, a tiny ice-covered speck in the Svalbard archipelago. You make landfall on October the 5th. Solid ground. For the first time in nearly 3 months, you're standing on something that isn't moving. You set up camp. You build a shelter from driftwood and canvas. Strindberg takes photographs. The last photographs. Images of 3 men in a landscape of ice and rock. Their faces gaunt but still alert, still functioning, still alive. And then the diary entries stop. October 8th, 1897. Andrew's last journal entry. No explanation, no farewell, no dramatic final words, just silence. 3 men on an island at the edge of the world, and then nothing. For 33 years, nothing. In 1930, Norwegian whalers aboard the vessel Bratvar land on Kvitoya. They find the camp. They find the remains of 2 of the 3 men. They find the diaries, carefully wrapped, still legible. And they find the cameras. Strindberg's cameras with exposed film still inside. 93 photographs are recovered and developed, images from 3 decades earlier, frozen in time and chemistry. Images of the balloon flying low over the ice. Images of the men hauling sledges. Images of polar bear hunts. Images of a camp on an island where 3 men waited for a rescue that never came, and died in a silence so complete that the world needed 33 years to hear it. The cause of death remains debated. Hypothermia, polar bear attack, trichinosis from undercooked bear meat. A theory that has gained considerable traction among modern researchers. Lead poisoning from their canned food. Even suicide. Morphine bottles were found at the camp, and Andrew's diary was neatly wrapped in a way that suggests deliberate preparation. Swedish researcher Beyer Usma spent decades investigating the mystery and concluded that Strindberg may have been killed by a polar bear. Frankel died of injuries or illness, and André, alone, the last one alive on a frozen island, the man whose balloon was going to change everything, may have taken his own life with the morphine. We don't know. The ice knows. The ice always knows. But the ice doesn't talk. What we do know is this. In 1930, when the bodies and the photographs reached Sweden, the nation mourned as if the 3 men had died yesterday. They'd been gone for 33 years, but the photographs made them present again, alive, walking, hunting, staring at the camera with the clear-eyed intensity of people who didn't know they were already ghosts. André, Strindberg, and Frankel were given a state funeral. Tens of thousands lined the streets of Stockholm. The photographs were published worldwide. The diaries were transcribed and studied. And the balloon, the eagle, the leaking, doomed, beautiful, insane balloon, became a symbol of something that defies easy categorization. Hubris? Yes. Courage? Certainly. Stupidity? Probably. But also something else. Something about the human refusal to accept that some things can't be done, even when every rational indicator screams that they can't. André flew a leaking balloon into the Arctic because he believed that humans should be able to fly to the North Pole. He was wrong about the method, but the belief itself, the raw, irrational, magnificent belief that the sky is not the limit, that the ice is not the end, that the horizon is not a wall, that belief is the engine that drives every crossing in this video. André didn't make it, but he flew. For 65 hours over the top of the world in a machine made of silk and gas and faith. He flew. Now, André tried to cross the Arctic from above. He wanted to skip the suffering, bypass the ice, float over the problem entirely. It didn't work, but the next crossing takes you back to the ice itself. Back to the surface, back to the cold, back to the brutal simplicity of putting one foot in front of the other. And this time, the story isn't about survival. It's about a race. A race that was already lost before it started, and a walk home that became the most famous tragedy in the history of exploration. You have reached the South Pole. You should be elated. You should be screaming with joy, planting your flag, taking photographs, recording the moment for history. You have walked nearly 900 miles through the worst conditions on Earth. You have dragged sledges up the Beardmore Glacier. You have survived blizzards and crevasses and temperatures that make metal stick to bare skin. But you're not screaming with joy. You're staring at a flag that's already there. A Norwegian flag, planted by Roald Amundsen 5 weeks ago. Your name is Robert Falcon Scott. You're 43 years old. Captain, Royal Navy. And you have just lost the race to the South Pole. It's January 17th, 1912. You're standing at 90 degrees south latitude with 4 companions: Edward Wilson, Lawrence Oates, Edgar Evans, and Henry Bowers. 5 men at the bottom of the world, looking at a tent, a flag, and a note from Amundsen, politely asking you to deliver a letter to the King of Norway. Just in case, Amundsen wrote, he didn't make it back himself. He made it back. You already know this somehow, the neatness of the camp, the confidence of the note. Amundsen was here, and Amundsen left, and Amundsen is probably already in Tasmania by now, sending telegrams and drinking champagne. You write in your diary, the worst has happened. And then, great God, this is an awful place. Now, the race to the pole is a story that's been told 1,000 times. Amundsen and his dogs versus Scott and his ponies. The Norwegian who planned perfectly versus the Englishman who planned bravely. There are libraries written about why Amundsen won and Scott lost, and the arguments have been running for over a century and show no signs of stopping. But this story isn't about the race. This story is about the walk home. Because reaching the pole was the easy part. 900 miles south, with supplies cached along the route, with the weather mostly behind you. The walk home is 900 miles back, into the wind with dwindling food, and the knowledge that you failed pressing down on your shoulders with a weight that no sledge harness was designed to carry. You turn north. 5 men, 3 sledges, dragging everything they need across the polar plateau. The elevation is over 9,000 feet. The air is thin. The temperature is dropping. Dropping faster than it should because the Antarctic autumn of 1912 is arriving early. And it's arriving angry. Edgar Evans is the first to break. Big, strong, reliable Edgar Evans. The man who could fix anything, haul anything, endure anything. Something has gone wrong inside him. He fell on the Beardmore Glacier and hit his head, and since then he's been different. Slower. Confused. His hands are frostbitten so badly that he can't grip the sledge traces. His words come out muddled, as if the language center of his brain is frosting over the same way his fingers are. On February the 17th, Evans collapses. He dies that night. You record it in your diary with the clinical precision of a naval officer writing a ship's log. But the clinical precision doesn't hide the fear underneath. You are 800 miles from base. You are now 4 men. And the weather is getting worse. The temperature drops. And drops. And keeps dropping. February becomes March, and the mercury falls to levels that Scott's expedition had not planned for. -30. -40. Temperatures so extreme that the sledge runners freeze to the surface and must be torn free with each step, like pulling nails from frozen wood. The food depots are spaced at intervals along the return route, but the intervals were calculated for a pace you can no longer maintain. You're moving too slowly. The cold is burning through calories faster than the food can replace them. The terrible arithmetic of polar travel is asserting itself. You need more fuel to melt snow for water, but more fuel means heavier sledges, which means slower travel, which means more time between depots, which means you need more fuel. And then there's Oates. Lawrence Titus Oates, Captain 6th Inniskilling Dragoons, the cavalry officer who volunteered for this expedition because he was Titus Oates, and Titus Oates didn't say no to things that scared him. He's been in charge of the ponies that died on the barrier, the ponies that everyone now admits were a mistake. And now his feet are destroyed. Frostbite has turned his feet black. He can barely walk. Each morning it takes him longer to put on his boots, 30 minutes, an hour longer, because the swelling has made his feet too large for the leather. And the process of forcing ruined flesh into frozen boots is a pain so exquisite that the other men have to look away. Oates knows what he is. He's a burden. Every hour he slows the party is an hour closer to death for everyone. He's been carrying this knowledge for days, turning it over in his mind with the same methodical clarity he'd apply to a cavalry maneuver. The problem is tactical. The solution is tactical. On the morning of March 17th, his 32nd birthday, Oates unzips the tent. The blizzard outside is ferocious. Visibility is 0. The temperature is approximately -40. He looks at his companions. He says, "I am just going outside and maybe some time." He walks into the blizzard. He does not come back. Those words, "I am just going outside and maybe some time." 11 words that have become, arguably, the most famous sentence in British history. The understatement, the courtesy, the absolute refusal to make his own death into a drama that would burden the people he was trying to save. He walked into a blizzard on his birthday and phrased his suicide as if he were stepping out for a walk. His body is never found. Somewhere on the Ross ice shelf, buried under a century of snow, Titus Oates is still going outside. You are 3 men now, you, Wilson, Bowers. You are 11 miles from the next supply depot. 11 miles. A few hours of walking in good conditions. A day's march even in bad conditions. But the conditions aren't bad. They're impossible. The blizzard that took Oates doesn't stop. For days. The temperature stays below -40. The wind pins you in your tent with a force that makes standing upright an athletic achievement. You wait. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The food runs out. The fuel runs out. The cold seeps through the canvas and the sleeping bags and the clothing and the skin and settles into the core of you, where it begins the slow, quiet work of shutting everything down. You write. That's what you do in the tent, in the darkness, in the last hours. You write letters. To your wife, Kathleen, to the families of your dead companions, to the British public. The letter to the public is the one that will endure. Written with frozen fingers, in pencil, the handwriting deteriorating with each line as the cold takes your fine motor control. We took risks, we knew we took them. Things have come out against us, and therefore we have no cause for complaint. You write about the blizzard, about Oates, about the supplies that are 11 miles away and might as well be on the moon. You write about the decisions you made and the ones you didn't make, and the fine, cruel line between courage and foolishness that every explorer walks and most never see until it's too late. The last entry in your diary is dated March 29th, 1912. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. And then, at the bottom, scrawled in a hand that barely functions, "For God's sake, look after our people." A search party finds the tent 8 months later. November 1912. 3 bodies in their sleeping bags. Wilson and Bowers with their bags closed, composed, apparently at peace. You with your sleeping bag open, one arm extended toward Wilson, as if reaching for something in the final moment. 11 miles. The depot was 11 miles away. Enough food and fuel to survive, to keep walking, to reach the next depot and the next, and eventually the base camp where the rest of your expedition was waiting and worrying and hoping. 11 miles. In Antarctica, 11 miles is either nothing or everything. For Scott, Wilson and Bowers, it was everything. and the blizzard that kept them in their tent for those final days? That blizzard was the difference between a story about failure and redemption and a story about failure and death. Robert Falcon Scott lost the race to the pole. He lost 4 of his companions. He lost his own life, 11 miles from salvation. But his diary, those words, written in a dying hand, in a frozen tent, at the bottom of the world, those words have outlasted every flag ever planted in the ice. We took risks. We knew we took them. Some crossings end in glory. Some end in silence. Scott's ended in pencil. On paper. In a tent that the ice eventually buried and the wind eventually forgot. But there's one more crossing, the strangest one of all. Because the next man you're about to become didn't fight the ice. He didn't race it. He didn't try to cross it or conquer it or escape it. He deliberately gave himself to it. He froze his ship into the ice on purpose, and then he waited for 3 years to see where the ice would take him. You are going to do something that every other explorer in history would consider insane. Well, not insane exactly. Let's say unconventional. You are going to build a ship, a very specific ship, round-hulled, massively reinforced, designed not to cut through ice but to sit on it. And then you are going to sail that ship into the Arctic pack ice, let it freeze solid and drift for years across the entire Arctic Ocean, because you believe, against the conventional wisdom of every polar expert alive, that the Arctic ice moves, that it flows like a slow river from Siberia across the pole and down toward Greenland. And if you're right, your ship will carry you across the top of the world without you having to take a single step. If you're wrong, the ice will crush your ship and you'll die. Your name is Fridtjof Nansen. You're Norwegian, 31 years old, and you are already, by any reasonable measure, one of the greatest explorers in history. In 1888, you did something nobody had ever done. You crossed the Greenland ice cap on skis, east to west, a journey that the scientific establishment said was impossible. You did it in 49 days. When you arrived on the west coast, the last ship of the season had already left, so you spent the winter with the Inuit, learning their survival techniques. Then you went home and wrote a best-selling book about it. But Greenland was a warm-up. The Arctic Ocean is the main event. Your theory comes from a discovery made in 1884, when wreckage from the USS Jeannette, an American ship crushed by ice near Siberia in 1881, was found on the southwest coast of Greenland. 3 years after sinking on one side of the Arctic, pieces of the ship turned up on the other side. The ice had carried them across. If wreckage can drift across the Arctic, Nansen reasons, a ship can drift across the Arctic. If the ship is strong enough. If the hull is shaped correctly. If the crew is patient enough to spend years locked in ice, drifting at the pace of ocean currents, watching the same frozen horizon day after day after day. You commission a ship. You name it Fram, Norwegian for forward. The shipbuilder, Colin Archer, constructs a vessel unlike anything the world has seen. The hull is rounded so that when ice presses against it, the ship will be pushed up rather than crushed. The walls are insulated with cork and felt. The interior is designed for years of habitation. A library, a workshop, a small organ for music during the long dark months. On June 24th, 1893, you sail the Fram out of Oslo with a crew of 13, north along the coast of Norway, east across the Barents Sea, north again past Novaya Zemlya, into the ice-choked waters above Siberia. You're heading for the place where the Jeanette sank, where the current begins. On September 22, 1893, the ice closes around the Fram. You shut down the engines, you secure the rudder, you settle in, and you wait. The drift is real. Nansen was right. The Arctic ice does move slowly, relentlessly, carrying everything frozen within it toward the northwest. The Fram drifts at a pace of roughly 1 to 2 miles per day, some days more, some days less. Some days the ice carries you backward as if the ocean is having second thoughts. The crew adapts, you establish routines, scientific observations, maintenance, hunting, cooking. The days have structure, the weeks have rhythm, the months have a sameness that tests the mind in ways that cold and hunger never could. You are, all 13 of you, voluntarily imprisoned in a floating laboratory, surrounded by an infinity of white, moving at a speed that makes walking look reckless. The darkness comes, the polar night. The sun disappears below the horizon in October 1893. And for months the world is a study in shades of black and blue. The northern lights provide occasional illumination, great curtains of green and red fire rippling across the sky. But even their beauty becomes routine after the 100th night. You take observations. Temperature, ice thickness, wind speed, ocean depth, current direction. You lower thermometers through holes in the ice to measure the temperature of the water thousands of feet below. You discover that the Arctic Ocean is far deeper than anyone suspected, in some places over 12,000 feet. This discovery alone would justify the entire expedition. But the drift is too slow. After a year and a half, the Fram has moved far north, past 84 degrees, but the current is bending. The ship isn't heading for the pole, it's heading west of it. At this rate, you'll emerge from the ice somewhere near Spitsbergen, having passed hundreds of miles from the North Pole without reaching it. This is where a lesser explorer would accept the result. The drift theory has been proven. The scientific data is extraordinary. The ship is intact. The crew is healthy. Going home with these achievements would make you a hero. But you are Fridtjof Nansen, and Fridtjof Nansen does not settle for almost. On March 14th, 1895, you leave the Fram. You take one companion, Hjalmar Johansen, a naval reservist and championship gymnast, 28 dogs, 3 sledges, 2 kayaks, and enough food for 100 days. You point yourself north, and you start walking. The Fram will continue drifting without you. Your plan is simple. Walk to the pole, then walk south to Franz Josef Land, and wait for a ship. The Fram will eventually emerge from the ice on its own. It is an audacious plan. It is a plan that assumes everything will go right. And for a while, everything does. You and Johansen push north across the pack ice. The conditions are brutal. Pressure ridges, open leads, temperatures that turn sweat to ice inside your clothing. The dogs pull the sledges with the desperate energy of animals that sense the wrongness of this place. You navigate by the sun, by dead reckoning, by the instruments you carry. On April 8th, 1895, you reach 86 degrees, 13 minutes north. Farther north than any human being has ever stood. The North Pole is still 230 miles away, but the ice ahead is broken, chaotic, impossible to cross with dogs and sledges. The leads of open water are too wide. The pressure ridges are too tall. The surface is a maze of obstacles that no amount of determination can overcome. You make the decision. The same decision Shackleton will make. 13 years later, 97 miles from the South Pole. You turn around. The journey south to Franz Josef Land takes 5 months. 5 months of ice travel, kayak crossings, polar bear encounters, and the slow, heartbreaking consumption of dogs that can no longer pull and must now serve a different purpose. Each dog that falls behind or can't continue is killed and fed to the others. It's practical, it's necessary, and it's a cruelty that neither of you will ever forget. By August, you reach an unnamed island in the Franz Josef Land archipelago. Winter is closing in fast. The temperature is dropping, the daylight shrinking, and you have no choice but to stop and wait for spring. You and Johansen build a hut from stones, driftwood, and whatever materials you can scavenge. You line the walls with walrus skins. You dig out a floor below the permafrost line. The ceiling is so low that you can't stand upright. For 9 months, you and Johansen live in this hovel. 9 months of darkness, walrus meat, polar bear fat, and each other's company. You have no books, no cards, no entertainment of any kind beyond conversation. The two of you, who began this journey as strangers, become something closer. Not friends exactly, but companions in a way that only people who have shared utter isolation can understand. You develop routines. You hunt walrus when the weather permits. You maintain a blubber lamp that provides feeble light and precious warmth. You sleep for 12, 14, 16 hours at a stretch, because sleep is the only escape from the monotony. In June 1896, you encounter a British expedition led by Frederick Jackson. The meeting is one of the great moments in exploration history. Jackson, exploring Franz Josef Land, sees a tall, bearded figure approaching across the ice. The figure is filthy, weather-beaten, dressed in rags, and accompanied by a single equally dishevelled companion. Jackson stares. "You are Nansen, aren't you?" "Yes, I am Nansen." The Fram, meanwhile, has emerged from the ice near Spitsbergen exactly as Nansen predicted. The crew is safe. The ship is intact. The drift theory is proven, and Nansen has set a new farthest north record that will stand for years. Fridtjof Nansen returns to Norway as the most famous explorer on Earth. He writes another best-selling book. He receives medals, honors, lecture invitations. He could spend the rest of his life dining on Arctic stories. Instead, he becomes a diplomat and then a humanitarian. After World War I, Nansen leads the repatriation of 500,000 prisoners of war. He creates the Nansen Passport, a travel document for stateless refugees that is still used in modified form today. He wins the Nobel Peace Prize in 1922. He saves hundreds of thousands of lives through famine relief in Russia. The man who froze himself into the ice became the man who thawed the world's conscience. The explorer who let the Arctic carry him across the top of the world spent the rest of his life carrying other people to safety. Nansen died in 1930 at the age of 68. Norway gave him a state funeral. The Fram is preserved in a museum in Oslo, where you can still see the rounded hull that was designed to ride above the ice rather than be crushed by it. He was right about the current. He was right about the ship. He was right about the ice. And in the end, he was right about something even more important, that the skills you learn at the edge of the world, patience, courage, the ability to see what others can't, are the same skills that save people far from any ice at all. Now, Nansen let the ice carry him. He trusted it. He built a ship that could ride above its crushing force, and then sat back and waited while the currents did the work. It was the most patient crossing in polar history. But our final crossing tonight is about the opposite of patience. It's about urgency. About a group of men hauling supplies across 1,000 miles of Antarctic ice because they believed, they had to believe, that someone on the other side needed them. The cruelest part? Nobody did. You already know the man they were trying to save. You lived his story at the very beginning of tonight. Ernest Shackleton. But this is the story of the people on the other side of his expedition. The ones history forgot. The ones who suffered just as much, lost just as much, and discovered that everything they'd done was for nothing. You have never met Ernest Shackleton. Not in person. You know his name, of course. Everyone in the small world of Antarctic exploration knows his name. You've read about his Nimrod expedition, about the moment he turned back 97 miles from the South Pole. You've heard the stories, the charisma, the ambition, the way he can make the impossible sound like a weekend outing. But you've never shaken his hand. You've never looked him in the eye. You've never had the experience that so many other men describe. The feeling of being in Shackleton's presence and suddenly believing that you can do anything, survive anything, accomplish anything, simply because Shackleton told you that you could. All you have is his plan, and his plan is going to nearly kill you. And the cruelest part, the part that will haunt you for the rest of your life, is that his plan will turn out to be completely, utterly pointless. Your name is Aeneas McIntosh. You're 44 years old. You've already lost an eye in Antarctica, literally lost it, during Shackleton's Nimrod expedition. When a hook struck your face during an unloading operation, you went back anyway. That tells you everything you need to know about the kind of man you are, and the kind of hold that Antarctica has on you. It's 1914. Shackleton's Imperial Transantarctic Expedition has two components: the glory half, Shackleton himself, aboard the Endurance, crossing Antarctica from the Weddell Sea, and the support half, you aboard the Aurora, working from the Ross Seaside. Your job is simple on paper and catastrophic in practice. Lay supply depots across the Great Ice Barrier, stretching from McMurdo Sound all the way to the Beardmore Glacier. These depots will contain food and fuel for Shackleton's crossing party when they arrive from the other side. If Shackleton doesn't make it across, your depots are meaningless. If Shackleton does make it across and your depots aren't there, Shackleton dies. The weight of this responsibility is absolute. You are the safety net for a man you've never met, performing a crossing you can't see, on a timeline you can't predict, and you have to do it perfectly. Because imperfection in this context means death. Not your death, but his. You arrive at McMurdo Sound in January 1915. The Aurora is poorly equipped. Shackleton, ever the optimist about budgets, has provided inadequate supplies for the depot-laying operation. Your clothing is insufficient, your food is limited, your sledging equipment is second-hand, but you have enough. Barely. You begin the work. The first depot-laying journeys go reasonably well. You and your men haul supplies south across the barrier, caching food and fuel at predetermined intervals. The work is brutal, man-hauling sledges across the ice in temperatures that make your breath freeze before it leaves your mouth. But it's work you've done before, and your men are capable. Then the Aurora breaks free. In May 1915, a storm tears the Aurora from her moorings in McMurdo Sound and blows her out to sea. The ship drifts, trapped in pack ice, carrying most of your supplies, your spare clothing, your sledging equipment, and your only means of communication with the outside world. You and 9 companions are stranded at McMurdo Sound with almost nothing. Almost nothing. You have the clothes on your backs, some seal meat, some supplies from the original shore camp, and the knowledge, the terrible binding knowledge, that Shackleton is counting on those depots being in place. That somewhere on the other side of Antarctica, Shackleton's crossing party may already be walking toward the Beardmore Glacier, expecting to find food and fuel waiting for them. If the depots aren't there, Shackleton will die. You don't know that the Endurance has already been crushed. You don't know that Shackleton is camping on an ice floe in the Weddell Sea, playing cards and keeping 27 men alive through sheer force of personality. You don't know that the crossing will never happen. You don't know that every depot you lay, every mile you haul, every frostbitten toe and frozen finger and moment of starvation will be for nothing. You just know the plan, and the plan says, lay the depots. So you lay the depots. Through the winter of 1915, you and your men prepare, and prepare is a generous word for what you're actually doing, which is improvising survival from practically nothing. The Aurora took your proper sledging equipment, your warm clothing, your sleeping bags, your cooking gear. Everything that was designed and tested for Antarctic travel is now drifting somewhere in the Ross Sea, locked inside a ship you can't reach. So you make do. You sew clothing from canvas tent material, stiff, uncomfortable, inadequate, but better than nothing. You cobble together boots from the scraps of seal fur that previous expeditions left behind at the old Discovery Hut. You repair broken sledges with scrap timber. You fashion harnesses from rope. You build a camp stove from an old oil drum. Every piece of equipment you use is improvised, adapted, held together by ingenuity and desperation. Ernest Joyce, one of your most experienced men, a veteran of Scott's earlier expeditions, takes charge of the practical preparations. He's done this before. He knows what Antarctic sledging requires, and he knows that what you have isn't enough. But he also knows that enough is a relative concept when people are depending on you. In September 1915, with the first light of the Antarctic spring, you set out. 10 men, hauling sledges loaded with food and fuel, walking south across the Ross Ice Shelf toward the Beardmore Glacier. The distance is staggering, over 1,500 miles round trip. You are dragging supplies meant for a man you've never met, across terrain that doesn't care who receives them. The conditions are appalling. You are inadequately clothed. The Aurora took your proper polar gear when it blew away. Your boots are improvised. Your food rations are calculated to the last ounce, and the calculations don't include much margin for error. Frostbite becomes routine. Hunger becomes constant. The wind at the Ross Ice Shelf is relentless, blowing directly into your faces as you march south, stripping heat from your bodies faster than you can generate it. You lay the depots, one by one. Each cache is carefully positioned, marked with flags and cairns, filled with the food and fuel that Shackleton's party will need. Each depot represents days of hauling, hours of digging, calories that you can't spare being burned for a purpose you can't verify. The routine is numbingly brutal. Wake at 5, eat a breakfast of hoosh, a thick, greasy stew of pemmican and biscuit that provides calories but no pleasure. Pack the sledges, clip into the harnesses, and then haul. 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. If the surface is good, every step drives the harness into your shoulders. Every mile strips another layer from your reserves. At night you crawl into sleeping bags that are stiff with ice. Your own breath and body moisture freezes inside the fabric, turning the bags into rigid, frost-lined tubes that you must force your way into. Some mornings, the bags are so frozen that it takes 20 minutes just to get out of them. The inside of the tent is coated in rime ice. Every surface sparkles and drips and refreezes. And through all of this, through every miserable, aching, frost-bitten day, you are sustained by a single thought. Shackleton is counting on you. Somewhere on the other side of this continent, a man you've never met is walking toward these depots, and if they're not here, he will die. That thought gets you out of your sleeping bag. That thought keeps you hauling when your body screams stop. That thought is the only fuel that matters, because every other fuel, every calorie of pemmican, and every ounce of kerosene is meant for someone else. And then the deaths begin. Arnold Spencer Smith, the expedition's chaplain, develops scurvy. The signs are unmistakable: swollen, bleeding gums, loose teeth, dark bruises appearing on his skin from the slightest pressure. His joints swell until bending a knee becomes an act of excruciating will. He falls behind. Then he can't walk at all. You could leave him. The mathematics are clear. Dragging a helpless man on a sledge slows the entire party, burns calories that nobody can spare, and risks everyone's survival. But you don't leave him. You strap him to a sledge and drag him. A man, pulling supplies for a man who isn't coming. Day after day, you haul Spencer Smith across the ice. He slips in and out of consciousness. He's aware enough to know what's happening, to feel the guilt of being a burden, to whisper apologies that nobody wants to hear. On March 9th, 1916, Arnold Spencer Smith dies on the sledge. You bury him in the ice, Mark the spot with a cross made from a broken ski pole, and keep walking. You yourself are struggling. Your vision, already compromised by the loss of your eye, is deteriorating. Your strength is failing. The return journey from the final depot is a race against your own body, and your body is losing. On May 8, 1916, somewhere between the depots and McMurdo Sound, you and a companion named Victor Hayward walk onto sea ice that is thinner than it should be. The ice breaks. Both of you fall through into the freezing water below. Neither of you is seen again. Aeneas McIntosh, the one-eyed man who went back to Antarctica, who laid depots for a crossing that never happened, who dragged a dying priest across the ice for a man he'd never met, disappears into the Ross Sea. His body is never recovered. The surviving members of the shore party spend the rest of 1916 at McMurdo Sound, slowly starving, waiting for a rescue they can't be certain will come. The Aurora, having drifted helplessly in the pack ice for months, eventually breaks free, limps to Port Chalmers in New Zealand with a battered hull and a desperate crew, and undergoes repairs. It takes months to organize a relief voyage, months during which nobody knows whether the shore party is alive or dead. In January 1917, the Aurora finally returns to McMurdo Sound. The rescue party finds 7 survivors, emaciated, frostbitten, traumatized, but alive. They have laid every single depot that Shackleton's plan required. Every single one. And none of them were used, not one, because the Endurance was crushed and the crossing never happened. And every mile of ice they hauled across, every calorie they burned, every frostbitten finger, and every improvised boot, and Arnold Spencer Smith's life, and Aeneas McIntosh's life, all of it was for nothing. Or was it? Because here's the thing that makes the Ross Sea Party different from every other story in this video. They didn't know. They didn't know the crossing was off. They didn't know the Endurance was gone. They didn't know that their suffering had no audience and their depots had no purpose. They did the work anyway. They completed the mission. They fulfilled their part of a plan that had already failed, because the plan was all they had. And in the absence of information, in the absence of certainty, in the absence of any confirmation that their pain was leading somewhere, they chose to believe it mattered. That might be the most human thing in this entire video. Not the courage, not the endurance, not the feces dagger, or the balloon, or the 30 miles, or the 11 miles, or the 700 miles, just doing the job, because someone might need you, because you said you would, because the alternative, sitting at McMurdo Sound and hoping, was worse than walking into the wind. 3 of the Ross Sea Party died. The rest survived. When they finally learned the truth, that Shackleton's crossing never happened, that the depots were untouched, that their friends died for nothing, the survivors didn't rage, they didn't curse Shackleton's name. Most of them simply went quiet, in the way that people go quiet when they encounter a truth too large for words. They had done something extraordinary, and it hadn't mattered. And they had done it anyway. 12 crossings. 12 times you walked out onto the ice and asked it to let you through. Some of you made it home, some of you didn't. and one of you laid depots across 1,000 miles of ice for a crossing that never came, and that might be the bravest thing of all. These stories span 120 years, from the Belgica in 1897 to Worsley in 2016. Different eras, different technologies, different reasons for going. But the ice was always the same, cold, indifferent, patient, waiting for the moment when your plans fell apart and your equipment failed, and your body said no, and then seeing what you did next. What connects these crossings isn't courage, though there was plenty. It isn't survival, because some didn't survive. It's something quieter, something you can feel but can't quite name. It's the moment when everything falls away. The plans, the equipment, the training, and what's left is just you. You against the ice. You against the voice that says, stop. It's over. Let go. Ada picked up a rifle she'd never fired. Mawson bandaged his feet together and kept walking. Shackleton pointed a 22-foot boat at an island 800 miles away. Bartlett played Chopin on a sinking ship and then walked to Siberia. Mackintosh laid depots for a crossing that would never happen, because the plan was all he had. The ice doesn't care about your story, but you do, and sometimes that's enough. Since you made it this far, I'm glad you enjoyed the episode. If you would like to continue listening to episodes with similar themes, I linked them in the description below. You will also find a playlist of our most popular videos. Sleep now, nightlings, and wake up, as always, a little stronger and a little wiser. The story is done, but yours continues.